Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and today I'll take you on a spooky story. But don't worry, it will be a gentle and relaxing journey before you drift off to sleep. If you're looking for a tale that's just mysterious enough and gentle enough to relax to, then you've come to the right place. Now, find yourself a comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the story begin. Story 1: The Ghost's Song, a melody of madness and death. It all started on the first night I noticed the sound. The soft hum, barely audible, but persistent, like a melody lost in the wind, echoing through the cold, dark halls of my home. I had just moved into the house on Maple Street, a quiet neighborhood nestled at the edge of town, its charm evident in the time-worn structures that lined the streets. But there was something off about this place, a lingering unease that I couldn't quite put into words. My name is Sarah, and I've always been the type to dismiss the strange noises and creaks that come with old houses. But the sound was different. It wasn't just the wind rattling the windows or the house settling. This was something alive, something purposeful. A song in a language I couldn't recognize, coming from somewhere deep within the house. At first I thought it was my imagination. Perhaps the house was simply too quiet, too still. But as the days passed, the song became louder, clearer, and I realized it wasn't just a passing whisper. No, this was something far more disturbing. The first time I heard it, I was sitting in my living room, the flickering light of a candle casting long shadows across the walls. I remember it distinctly. It was around midnight when the house seemed to breathe with its own rhythm. The song was soft at first, like a lullaby, but its eerie cadence sent chills crawling up my spine. It was almost melodic, but jagged, with notes that hung in the air as if they didn't belong. The words, if they could even be called words, were foreign, ancient, a language I had never heard before. It wasn't a lullaby of comfort. It wasn't meant to soothe. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as the house settling, maybe the wind pushing through cracks in the walls. But the song lingered long after the wind had stopped howling. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The song wasn't just an eerie hum in the air. It was accompanied by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate. Someone or something was walking. I stood frozen, holding my breath, listening to the creaking of the floorboards above. My eyes darted around the dimly lit room, trying to pinpoint where the sounds were coming from. The song continued, faint but persistent, as though someone was singing it from a far-off distance. Yet so close, it felt like it was whispering directly in my ear. It wasn't until the third night that I dared to investigate. I had spent the day unpacking and adjusting to my new life here. But as the evening wore on, the unease from the past few nights crept back into my mind. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it was just the house, settling after years of neglect. But as the clock struck midnight, the song began again. Soft at first, then louder, clearer. I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know where it was coming from. I grabbed the flashlight that sat on the side table, its dull beam slicing through the thick darkness of the hallway. The house felt colder now, colder than it ever had during the day. The walls seemed to breathe, the floorboards creaking with every step I took. The song led me down the hall, deeper into the bowels of the house. It felt like I was walking into the very heart of the darkness. The song came from upstairs. I was sure of it. But as I reached the foot of the staircase, something stopped me. A shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't the song that made my heart race, but the sudden, sharp sense of being watched. The air around me felt thick, oppressive, like something was lurking just out of sight. I hesitated, then slowly began climbing the stairs, my feet barely making a sound. The song grew louder with each step, and I felt a strange pull toward it, like it was calling to me, urging me forward. I reached the top of the stairs, my heart thudding in my chest. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by a flickering light that seemed to come from nowhere. And then I saw her, a figure standing in the hallway, partially obscured by shadows. She was facing the wall, her back to me, but I could see her clearly enough to make out her long, tangled hair, her pale, ghostly skin, and the tattered white dress she wore. She was swaying slightly, humming the song in a low, haunting voice. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. There was no doubt in my mind that this wasn't a living person. The song, the footsteps, the figure, it was all connected. But to what end? Who was she? And why was she singing? I didn't dare move. The air grew colder, and I felt the temperature drop as though the very house itself had become a tomb. I took a step forward, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and curiosity. But before I could approach, the figure slowly turned toward me. Her face was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes, wide and glassy, stared straight through me, unblinking. There was a vacant emptiness in them, like she wasn't really there at all. The song stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "Come with me," she said, her voice echoing like a distant memory. "The house awaits." A chill ran through me, a cold so deep that it felt like it was burning my very bones. My legs went weak and I stumbled back, but the figure didn't move. She just stood there, staring at me with those hollow, lifeless eyes. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed with fear, rooted to the spot by some unseen force. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the figure vanished. The hallway was empty once more. The song began again, quieter this time, as if it was fading into the distance. But the presence, the cold, that oppressive weight on my chest, it lingered. I felt it in every room I walked into, in every shadow I passed. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I ventured outside, desperate for some fresh air, trying to shake off the feeling that I was losing my mind. But as I stepped out onto the porch, I noticed something strange. The house across the street, the one that had been abandoned for over 30 years, was now empty. Or at least it seemed empty. The song once again began to echo from the depths of the house. This time, I didn't hesitate. I knew where it was leading me, but I couldn't escape the question that gnawed at the back of my mind. What had happened in that house all those years ago? What had caused the death of so many? And why was I being pulled back to it, night after night? I didn't know then, but I was about to find out. The journey to the truth, to uncovering the dark secrets of the house, was just beginning, and I was going to have to face the horrors hidden within, no matter what they were. The night was colder than usual, an eerie stillness hanging in the air. It was as if the very house had taken on a life of its own. breathing with a sinister rhythm. And the song, the haunting song, began once again. I had heard it every night since I moved in, but this time it was different, louder, more insistent, as if it had been waiting for me to finally acknowledge it. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the cold dread creeping over me. The song filled the air, a dissonant melody that clawed at the edges of my sanity. I turned over, pulling the blankets tighter around my shoulders. But I couldn't escape the growing sense that something was terribly wrong. The figure I had seen on the stairs the previous night, that strange woman in the white dress, haunted my thoughts. Her hollow eyes, her whispered invitation, "Come with me. The house awaits." The words echoed in my mind like a curse I couldn't shake off. I had to know what it meant, what this house wanted from me. But the fear of what I might uncover kept me frozen in place. But as the song persisted, it felt less like a warning and more like a summons. It was calling to me, drawing me closer. There was no escaping it. I finally forced myself out of bed, heart pounding in my chest. The cold air nipped at my skin as I stumbled into the hallway. Flashlight in hand, its weak beam barely cutting through the darkness. The house was unnervingly silent, save for the soft hum of the song that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was like the very walls were singing. I moved toward the stairs, my feet dragging with the weight of dread. The steps creaked underfoot, and as I ascended to the second floor, the song grew louder, more intense. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, my heartbeat quickening with each step. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but a part of me feared I was walking into something I couldn't escape. The hallway at the top of the stairs was just as I had left it. Dark, unsettling, and filled with that heavy, suffocating air. The faint glow from the flickering light cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. I paused in front of the door to the room where I had seen the figure, the one that now felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I opened the door slowly, my breath shallow. The room was empty, still, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. Someone standing at the far corner of the room. It was the woman again, her back to me, swaying gently to the song that had now become a quiet murmur, like a lullaby meant to lure me into a trance. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. She was there again, but this time, something was different. The air in the room had changed. It was thick, oppressive, almost suffocating. The shadows seemed to shift and stretch in unnatural ways, as though the very fabric of the room was alive and moving with a purpose. The woman's dress, once white and tattered, was now stained with dark, mottled patches that looked like old blood. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her long hair hung in greasy strands around her face. She stood completely still, her eyes closed, her lips moving in silent prayer. Or perhaps a chant I couldn't understand. The song seemed to come from her now, vibrating through the walls and floors, reverberating deep inside my chest. I wanted to move, to run, but my legs were frozen. The room seemed to pull at me, like it was sucking me in, demanding my attention. I took a tentative step forward. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't respond. Instead, she slowly turned toward me. Her eyes opened, and I felt a chill run through me as her gaze met mine. They weren't human eyes. There was nothing behind them, just emptiness. Hollow, dark voids that seemed to stare straight into my soul. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice a low, guttural rasp, as though it came from the depths of a grave. I stepped back, heart racing. The walls around me seemed to close in, and the air felt so thick I could barely breathe. "You don't belong here," she repeated, and I could feel the weight of her words pressing down on me. Before I could ask what she meant, she began to sway again, her head tilting to the side as she continued to chant. The words were not in any language I could understand, but they echoed in my mind, becoming clearer with each passing moment. The house calls. The house claims. Suddenly, the floor beneath me groaned. The entire house seemed to shift, as if it was waking from a long slumber. I could feel the vibrations in my bones, and before I could react, the woman collapsed to the floor, her body jerking violently, as if she were being pulled by an unseen force. Her mouth opened wide, and the song erupted from her throat, a piercing, unnatural sound that made my stomach churn. It was the same melody, the same haunting tune I had heard so many nights before. But now it was louder, sharper, full of rage and pain. I stumbled backward, my flashlight flickering and dying in my hand. The room spun, and I felt a sudden pull, like something invisible was dragging me toward her. I tried to resist, but the force was too strong. Just then the song stopped. The silence was deafening. I could hear my own breath, heavy and panicked, as I stood there in the dark, waiting for something, anything to happen. The woman lay motionless on the floor, her body unnaturally still. For a moment I thought I had imagined everything. The song, the figure, the terrifying presence that had filled the room. But then, in the far corner of the room, I saw it. The walls had begun to bleed. Slow, thick streams of dark liquid seeped from the cracks in the plaster, dripping down the walls like tears from some ancient forgotten sorrow. The blood, if that's what it was, dripped to the floor, pooling in the corners, spreading across the room like a dark stain. And then, a voice, low and guttural, whispered from the walls. "It's not over yet." The words sent a shock through my system, and I spun toward the door, my legs finally finding the strength to move. I ran down the hall, through the darkened house, not stopping until I reached the front door. I threw it open, gasping for air. But when I stepped outside, the world around me was silent. The house, though, seemed alive with a pulse of its own, the song still lingering in the air, like a memory that refused to fade. I turned to look at the house one last time. The windows were dark, but I swore I saw something, someone, watching me from the second floor. And then I heard it again. The song, faint but unmistakable. "Come with me." I had no choice now. The house was calling, and the song was my only guide. I don't remember when I first heard the song clearly. The lines blurred after a while, each night blending into the next, until I couldn't tell where one began and the other ended. But the melody was unmistakable. Its haunting lullaby echoed in my dreams, in the darkness of the house, following me like an invisible shadow. I spent days trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that it was just the wind, or maybe some strange auditory hallucination caused by the isolation of the old house. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something, or someone, was here, and it wanted me to listen. I couldn't explain it, but each night the song drew me in more, its pull becoming stronger, its urgency more apparent. And every time I tried to leave, the house wouldn't let me. It was during one of those restless nights, when I could no longer fight the need to follow the song, that I found myself standing in front of the old rotting house across the street. The one I had tried so hard to ignore, the one that had stood abandoned for decades. I had walked past it countless times, thinking nothing of it. A house that had been left to decay, just like so many others in the town. But now, the house didn't seem abandoned. It seemed alive, and its call had become impossible to ignore. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale light over the street as I crossed to the other side. I felt the familiar chill that came with the song's crescendo, a deep, gnawing cold that wrapped around me like a blanket of fear. My legs were heavy, as if the earth itself was reluctant to let me approach the house. The air felt thick with the weight of something unseen, something that watched from every shadow, waiting for me to come closer. I didn't want to go in. I didn't want to face whatever was inside that place. But the pull of the song was overwhelming. It was inside my head now, its whispers replacing my thoughts, its beckoning impossible to resist. And so, with my heart pounding in my chest, I pushed open the front gate, which groaned in protest, and stepped onto the overgrown lawn. The house loomed before me, dark and silent, its broken windows staring back like hollow eyes. The door, once grand and imposing, was now a twisted mockery of its former self. Half off its hinges, the wood warped and rotting. The smell of decay and mold hit me as soon as I crossed the threshold, but I didn't turn back. The song filled the air once more, louder now, clearer. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, in my bones, as if the very foundation of the house was alive with it. There was no turning back now. I stepped inside, the floor creaking under my weight. Dust swirled in the air, catching the faint light from the cracked windows. The house was cold, far colder than the night air outside. The walls seemed to close it around me, and for a moment I thought I might suffocate under the weight of the silence. But then the song rose again, and I followed it deeper into the house. I moved through the dark hallways, flashlight in hand, its beam dancing over old furniture covered in sheets, cracked picture frames hanging crookedly on the walls. The house had been abandoned for so long that the air seemed to have forgotten what it was like to breathe freely. But the song had not forgotten. It led me through the house down a narrow hallway toward the stairs. At the top of the stairs, there was a door, closed, old and worn. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, the cold metal sending a shock through my fingers. I twisted it and pushed open the door. Inside, the room was dark, the only light coming from the pale glow of the moon filtering through a crack in the wall. But it wasn't the darkness that froze me in place. It was what was in the center of the room. A mirror. The frame was ornate, though tarnished and rotting, and it stood tall and imposing against the far wall. But it wasn't the mirror itself that made my blood run cold. It was the reflection. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but as I stepped closer, I saw it more clearly. In the reflection, there was no longer just me standing there. A figure stood beside me, its features indistinct, blurry. The figure was tall, its outline almost glowing, and its presence felt heavy, suffocating. I couldn't look away. My breath caught in my throat as the figure began to move, its form becoming clearer with each passing second. Slowly, it turned its head toward me. Its face was twisted. The eyes were empty, hollow pits that stared back at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Come closer." The voice was soft, a whisper in the back of my mind, yet it echoed in the room, as though the house itself had spoken it. My heart raced in my chest, and I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My legs were frozen, my feet glued to the floor. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat, the beat reverberating through my body as the figure in the mirror continued to watch me. Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. It became colder, so cold that my breath fogged in front of me, the chill sinking into my bones. The figure in the mirror stepped forward, its movements jerky, unnatural, as if it wasn't quite connected to the world around it. "It's time." The voice came again, and this time I felt it more than I heard it. The song, now a distant hum, seemed to grow louder, vibrating through my very being. My skin crawled as the reflection in the mirror reached out, its hands stretching toward me, its fingers elongated, claw-like. And then, without warning, the figure lunged, its hands smashing against the glass, and the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces. The room erupted in a cacophony of sound. The crash of glass, the scream that tore itself from my throat, and then silence. I stood there, trembling, surrounded by shards of glass, my mind racing. The song was still there, distant, but more insistent than ever. And now, I understood. The house wasn't just calling me. It was pulling me into its past. I backed away slowly, my heart still hammering in my chest, as the darkness seemed to close in around me. The house was alive, aware of my every move. It knew me. It had been waiting for me. I turned, not daring to look at the broken mirror again, and fled from the room. My feet stumbled over the uneven floorboards, and the song followed me, its melody now an unbearable hum in my ears, growing louder with each step I took. I ran down the hallway, through the living room, out the door. But as I reached the front steps, I saw it again. The house across the street, dark and silent. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end. It wasn't just the house I had to face. It was the past, and I had no choice but to confront it. I thought running would set me free. I thought escaping the old house, the one across the street, would break the spell, the suffocating grip it had on me. But even as I sprinted back to my home, with my breath ragged and my heart pounding, I could feel the pull of it. The house wasn't just a building. It wasn't just a place. It was a presence, a force that reached into my mind, twisting it, twisting me. I had no idea how much time passed. My eyes burned from the tears I didn't remember shedding. I had run through the night, across the quiet streets, to my house. I stumbled into my front door, the song still echoing in my mind. It was a quiet hum, a melody that clung to the edges of my thoughts like a persistent memory, the notes vibrating in my chest with every heartbeat. I locked the door behind me, trembling. The house felt suffocating, even more so now that I was inside. The air was thick, heavy, with something I couldn't quite name. Something was watching me. Something was waiting. I leaned against the wall, my breathing unsteady, and closed my eyes, trying to force myself to calm down. But it didn't help. The more I tried to shake off the feeling, the more it intensified. It was as if the house had come alive with its own will, and that will was dragging me back to it, piece by piece. The whispers came then, low, far off, like the wind brushing against my ear. The voices, faint at first, grew clearer. The song, it was always the song. Come back. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. My eyes snapped open, and for a moment, I thought I was imagining things. The walls of my living room were still, the air still thick, but the song was louder. It felt closer now, pressing in from all sides, curling its tendrils around my thoughts, drowning out my own. The door. It had to be the door. I couldn't stop myself. My legs moved before I could even tell them to. I walked toward the door, my hand trembling as I grasped the doorknob, turning it slowly. The moment I stepped outside, the song grew louder, clearer. It wasn't just the air that had shifted, it was everything. The entire neighborhood felt different, out of sync with the world around me, as though reality itself was bending to the will of the house. The night had thickened. The moon was now a pale ghost hanging in the sky, casting a weak light over the street. I walked, not knowing where my feet were taking me. The houses around me were empty, their windows dark and uninviting. But in the distance, across the street, the house waited. It was calling me, and I couldn't fight it anymore. I crossed the street, step by slow step, the song tugging at the core of me, pulling me deeper into its clutches. The air grew colder the closer I got, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, thinner. The world around me grew quiet, as if holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I reached the front gate, the rusted iron creaking in protest as I pushed it open. My heart hammered in my chest. The house loomed in front of me, dark and silent, but I knew the truth now. It wasn't silent. It was just waiting. The same oppressive weight hung in the air, thick and suffocating. And the song was stronger, more insistent than ever. With trembling hands, I pushed open the front door. It groaned on its hinges, but this time, I didn't hesitate. The house felt familiar now, as though I had been here before, as though it had always been a part of me. The walls, the creaking floors, the cold, the smell of mildew, all of it felt like home. I stood in the hallway, the flashlight in my hand, shaking so badly I could barely focus the beam. The house stretched in front of me, the shadows deep and twisting. But there was no going back now. The house wasn't just a place. It was alive, a thing of terrible hunger, a thing that needed me. I started walking, the song in my ears now, louder, clearer. It was almost a whisper, yet it filled the space completely, vibrating in my very bones. My mind raced, the images of the broken mirror, the figure, the woman, all of it flooding back, each piece fitting together in a puzzle I couldn't understand. But I could feel the pieces slipping into place, one by one. I walked through the dark hallway toward the stairs. The wooden steps groaned under my weight as I ascended, each footfall ringing out in the silence like a drumbeat. At the top of the stairs, I turned and saw the familiar door again, the one I had opened before, the one with the broken mirror. I felt drawn to it. The door opened on its own, as though the house had already prepared a path for me. The room beyond was dark, but I stepped forward without thinking, my feet moving of their own accord. The song pulsed in the room now, surrounding me, suffocating me. And there it was, the mirror, whole again, standing in the center of the room. It wasn't cracked. It wasn't broken. The glass was smooth, untouched, and the reflection was no longer mine. The figure stood in front of me, its pale face distorted, its eyes hollow and dark. It was wearing a tattered white dress, the same one I had seen before. Its fabric now stained with something darker, something red. It turned slowly, its movements jerky, unnatural, like a puppet whose strings were pulled too tight. The voice came again, the whisper from the depths of the room, the one that echoed through my head. You have come home. I didn't know what it meant, but I could feel it in the air, the weight of the words hanging heavily around me. My chest tightened, my breath shallow, as the figure in the mirror stepped toward me. There was no escape. The walls seemed to close in around me, the room shrinking with every passing second. The song was everywhere now, filling the space until I thought my skull would crack open from the pressure. It's time, the figure said, its voice louder now, clearer, as if the house itself was speaking through it. The figure reached for me, its hand stretching toward the glass, and I stepped back, my heart racing, my pulse loud in my ears. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The mirror. It was opening. Suddenly a sharp sound cut through the air. It was the glass, cracking. A long, jagged line split the surface, and the figure's face twisted into something grotesque, its mouth opening wide, stretching, as though it was about to scream. But it didn't scream. It grinned, a sharp, impossibly wide grin, filled with darkness. I ran. The room spun around me, the walls stretching and warping, as though the very space was collapsing. The song rose again, now a deafening roar in my ears, drowning out everything else. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know where to run. All I knew was that I had to get out. The house wouldn't let me go, but I had to try. I stumbled down the stairs, my legs like lead, my feet slipping on the old wood. The house seemed to pulse around me, the walls bending, the shadows lengthening, reaching for me. And then, just as I reached the door, it slammed shut. I fell backward, my chest hitting the floor with a painful thud. I gasped for air, scrambling to my feet. But the door wouldn't open. The walls seemed to close in on me. And the song, the damn song, was louder than ever. I turned, looking for another way out. But the house, this damn house, had no escape. It had already claimed me. Story 2. The Ghost Behind the Kitchen Curtain. It started in the quiet hours of the evening. The house was always still at night, save for the occasional creaks from the floorboards or the hum of the refrigerator. I had long grown accustomed to the rhythm of our home, a rhythm that spoke of familiarity, of safety. I never thought it would change, never thought anything could disrupt the peace. But the house I once considered my sanctuary began to feel like a prison. Every night, around the same time, I would find myself in the kitchen. It was a habit, a routine. I would go in, put on the kettle for tea, and begin chopping vegetables or preparing some snack for my husband. I loved the way the kitchen smelled at night, the earthy aroma of fresh garlic, or the comforting warmth of a pot simmering on the stove. It was my refuge after a long day of taking care of the kids, cleaning, and making sure everything was in order. It was where I felt at home, safe in my little world. But then it began. At first it was subtle, almost easy to dismiss. I noticed a shadow out of the corner of my eye. I would glance toward the window where the kitchen curtain hung, half open, and think I saw something move. It wasn't a distinct shape, not at first, just a flicker, a brush against the fabric. I'd convinced myself it was the wind, or maybe a trick of the light. But the flickers grew more frequent and more distinct. It wasn't the wind. No, it was something else. Something far more sinister. The shadow grew longer and darker, stretching across the kitchen floor, even though the night was calm and the air still. I remember the first time I froze, knife in hand, staring at the curtain as it swayed slightly, though I had not touched it. I stood there, holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just my overactive imagination. The house was old, creaking and shifting with the seasons. Maybe it was just the house settling. But as the days passed, I began to dread those moments. The quiet, the stillness, and the growing presence that seemed to linger in the kitchen with me. I would walk past the curtain quickly, my heart pounding in my chest, pretending not to notice the shadow that seemed to follow me. Then one night, it changed. I was in the kitchen, just as I always was, chopping some vegetables for dinner. It was late, and the house was eerily quiet. My husband had long since gone to bed, and the kids were asleep in their rooms. The only sound was the soft tap of the knife against the cutting board, the gentle hum of the fridge. But then I heard it, a faint rustling sound, like fabric moving in the wind. I paused, knife in hand, and turned toward the curtain. The shadow was there again, but this time it was more distinct. It wasn't a flicker anymore. It was a shape, tall, dark, and looming. I could feel it pressing against me, as though it were waiting for something. I wasn't sure if I should move, if I should walk away. My heart raced, my fingers tightening around the handle of the knife, but I couldn't stop looking. There was something in that shadow, something that seemed so wrong. Then, as I stood there frozen, the shadow shifted. The fabric of the curtain swayed, but not like it had before. It wasn't a gust of wind. It was as though something was standing behind it, moving. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, barely daring to move. My pulse raced, and the kitchen felt smaller, suffocating. I reached out with trembling hands, grabbing the edge of the curtain. With one swift motion, I yanked it open. What I saw took my breath away. There, standing in the dim light of the kitchen, was me. Or at least, it looked like me. She was cutting meat, just as I had been moments before, her hands moving slowly, methodically. But there was something wrong about the way she moved. Her movements were too deliberate, too slow. It was like she was savoring the task, taking her time with each slice, the knife gliding easily through the meat. And then she looked up. Her eyes met mine, and I froze. They were empty, cold, lifeless. It was like looking into a mirror, but the reflection wasn't mine. The woman standing in front of me had a vacant expression, as though she didn't recognize me, as though I wasn't even there. But I was there. I was standing right in front of her, my hand still clutching the curtain. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the sound of it deafening in my ears. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. She tilted her head slightly, the motion slow, as if studying me. And then her lips parted. "Come closer," she whispered, her voice a soft rasp, as though she was speaking from the farthest corner of my mind. I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot, my body frozen in place. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. From me. "Don't be afraid," she whispered again, her voice a low, eerie melody. "It's only a matter of time." And then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. The kitchen was empty again, the shadow gone, the curtains swaying gently in the breeze that had somehow started to pick up. I stood there trembling, my heart still pounding in my chest. I didn't know what had just happened. I didn't know if I had imagined it, if my mind had tricked me. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone in this house anymore. The shadow was real, and it was waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where the shadow had been, my mind racing with questions. Was it a ghost, an apparition? Or was it something worse, something that was living, waiting for its chance to take me? But I couldn't escape it. No matter where I went, I felt its presence, hovering, lurking, waiting. It was only the beginning. The truth behind the kitchen curtain was more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The days that followed were nothing like before. Everything felt wrong, like a dissonant note that echoed through the walls of the house. I had always prided myself on the calm I'd created here. This home was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where everything fell into place. But now, it was as if the house itself was alive, breathing in the darkness that had settled into its corners. It was in the air, thick with something I couldn't identify. Fear, maybe. Or something older. Something that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to show itself. The shadow had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, but I wasn't fooled. I knew it wasn't gone. It lingered just beyond my line of sight, in the dark corners of my mind, as if waiting to strike again. I tried to go on with my daily routine, but nothing felt normal. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, checking the corners of rooms, glancing nervously at the kitchen curtain. Each time I walked past it, I could feel my heart race, my breath quicken, as if the very air around me held its breath, waiting for the next move. I couldn't sleep. I barely ate. My husband Greg noticed. He asked if I was okay, if something was bothering me. But how could I explain what I had seen? How could I tell him that the reflection I had seen in the kitchen wasn't me? That the woman who stood there, cutting meat with such unnatural precision, hadn't been my reflection at all? He would think I was losing my mind. But that didn't stop me from telling him, even if it was in the smallest, most cautious way. One night, after we put the kids to bed, I sat down across from him at the kitchen table. My hands were trembling as I wrapped them around my coffee mug, the warm liquid offering little comfort. I need to tell you something, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. Something strange happened the other night. In the kitchen. Greg didn't look up from his laptop, his fingers still typing, as he glanced over some reports from work. What do you mean strange? You're still having those nightmares? No, I said, shaking my head. This was real, Greg. I saw someone in the kitchen. It was me, but it wasn't. I saw myself standing behind the curtain, cutting meat. But when I looked closer, my reflection wasn't right. He stopped typing and finally looked up, a concerned frown knitting his brows. Honey, you've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you just need some sleep. No, I insisted, my voice rising. I know what I saw. It was me, but not me. There was something wrong about her. She looked at me and the words faltered in my throat, but I could see it in his eyes. He was concerned, yes, but I could tell he didn't believe me. The look of disbelief was all too familiar, and it stung. It made me feel even more alone. I'm telling you, something is wrong, I said, my voice breaking. Greg sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're scaring yourself, Emma. Maybe it's time we take a break from the late-night kitchen shifts, huh? I'll make dinner tonight. You go relax. But I couldn't relax. Not with the feeling of eyes on me. Not with the lingering dread in my chest. I watched him go to the fridge, still not taking me seriously, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. How could he not see it? How could he not feel the change? That night, I went to bed early, hoping that maybe sleep would help me forget. But the moment I closed my eyes, I saw it again. The shadow, stretching long and dark across the kitchen floor. I could hear it moving, ever so slowly, the unmistakable scrape of fabric against the air. It was there, waiting. I sat up in bed, my body drenched in sweat. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in on me. I could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the creaks of the old house settling. But there was something else too. Something breathing. Something not quite right. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 3:17 a.m. The same time every night. The same time I had heard the rustling by the curtain. With trembling hands, I stood up and made my way to the kitchen. My heart pounded in my chest, each step echoing in the stillness of the house. The kitchen was dark, the dim light from the street lamp outside casting long shadows across the floor. I reached for the switch and flipped the light on. Nothing. The room was empty, silent, but I could feel it. The weight of the air, heavy and oppressive. I turned toward the window, my eyes locking onto the curtain. The fabric hung still, but I could feel it there. Something lurking behind it, waiting. My breath caught in my throat, and before I could stop myself, I found my hand reaching out, fingers brushing the fabric. The moment I touched it, the shadow was there again, stretching across the floor, pulling at the very air around me. It was as if the room itself was alive, pulsating with something dark, something ancient. I yanked the curtain open. The woman was there again. She was standing in front of the window, her hands steady as she sliced the meat, her movements slow and deliberate, like she had all the time in the world. Her back was to me, but I could see the way she moved. Her posture perfect, too perfect. She didn't look like me anymore. She was something else. Her hair hung in perfect waves, but it was darker, almost as if it was soaked in oil. And then, as if sensing me, she turned. Her face was a twisted mirror of mine, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that bore into me like they could see right through my soul. Her lips didn't move, but I heard the voice in my head, clear and cold. You shouldn't have looked. My heart raced, my skin crawling with a cold sweat. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My body was frozen, my mind reeling. Who was she? What was she? And why did she look like me? Suddenly she smiled. The smile wasn't warm. It wasn't human. It was a grin that stretched too wide, too unnaturally. and I could see the darkness behind it, the abyss that seemed to pull at the very air in the room. And then she spoke, her voice low and chilling. "I've been waiting for you," the words echoed in my mind long after she was gone. The room was empty again, the kitchen silent, but I could still feel her presence, pressing against me like a weight on my chest. I stumbled back, falling to my knees on the cold kitchen floor. My head was spinning. Was I losing my mind? Was this a dream? A hallucination? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't escape her. She was here. She was real. And she was waiting. I don't know how long I stayed there, trembling on the floor. It could have been hours, or maybe only minutes. But when I finally stood up and stumbled back to my room, the weight of her words still clung to me. "I've been waiting for you." I didn't tell Greg. I couldn't. He would never understand. I didn't know what was happening or why it was happening. But I knew one thing for sure. The truth behind the kitchen curtain was far darker than I could ever imagine. And it was only just beginning. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to face the kitchen. I stayed in bed for hours, my body feeling heavy, like I was trapped in a dream I couldn't wake up from. My mind kept replaying the scene from last night. The woman in the kitchen, me in the kitchen, but it felt unreal, as if I had imagined it. But the terror, the coldness that still clung to my skin, told me otherwise. It was real. It was happening. Greg didn't understand, of course. He saw me as the same person I had been the day before. His wife, the mother of his children, the woman who took care of everything. He didn't see the change in me, the weight I was carrying, the dread that kept crawling under my skin. He told me to relax, that everything would be fine. But how could I relax when I felt like I was being watched every moment of every day? I had to know. I had to understand what was happening. That night, I told myself I wouldn't run away from the kitchen. I would face it head on, no matter how terrified I felt. I wasn't going to let whatever was in this house control me. I was the one who lived here, who made the rules. I had to take back control. But when the sun sank behind the horizon and the shadows began to stretch, I found myself standing at the edge of the kitchen doorway once again, staring into the dark. I was afraid to step inside. The air felt wrong, thick with something I couldn't name. The silence was oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the first move. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my hands trembling at my sides. But I had to do this. With a shaky breath, I crossed the threshold. The light from the street lamp outside spilled into the kitchen, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. The refrigerator hummed, the only sound in the room, but it felt like it was mocking me, like it knew something I didn't. I moved toward the window, where the curtain still hung loosely. Every step I took felt like it echoed in the quiet. I reached for the curtain, my fingers brushing against the fabric, and then I hesitated. What if she was there again? What if I opened it, and she was waiting for me, her eyes empty and cold, her grin stretched wide in that horrifying way? But I had to know. I couldn't live like this, afraid of my own kitchen, my own reflection. I took a deep breath, gathered what little courage I had left, and yanked the curtain open. Nothing. I stared into the darkened yard, my breath steadying as I realized the room was empty. There was no shadow, No strange presence waiting for me. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been a figment of my imagination, a trick of the light, a manifestation of my stress and exhaustion. But then I felt it, the cold. It wrapped around me like a heavy cloak, seeping into my bones. I froze. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the quiet anymore. It was the air, the way it felt, heavy, like the very walls of the house were closing in on me. I turned slowly, my heart in my throat. And there she was. She was standing just a few feet away from me, her face a perfect mirror of mine. But something was off. Her skin was pale, too pale, like it had been drained of life. Her hair hung in greasy clumps around her face. Her eyes, those hollow black eyes, locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to move. I was paralyzed, stuck in the gaze of this woman. This thing that looked like me but wasn't. She tilted her head, that same eerie, unnatural motion, as though she was studying me. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak right away. The silence between us stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I wanted to look away, to escape, but her eyes were like magnets, pulling me in. "You don't belong here," she whispered, her voice like a cold breeze, scraping across my skin. I wanted to protest, to tell her that I was the one who lived here, that this was my home. But the words died in my throat. She was right. She was the one who belonged here, not me. She stepped closer, her feet barely making a sound against the floor. My body screamed for me to move, to do something, but I couldn't. I couldn't look away from her eyes, from that empty, soulless gaze that seemed to see right through me. "You've been running from me," she said, her voice low and mocking. "But you can't run forever. I'm always here. I've always been here." Her words hit me like a slap. I felt the coldness seep deeper into my bones, a chill that wouldn't go away. I wanted to scream, to call out for Greg, but my voice was trapped in my throat, suffocating in fear. "What do you want from me?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. The woman, no, the thing, smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile that stretched too wide, a grin that made my blood run cold. Her teeth were too sharp, too perfect, like something out of a nightmare. "What I want is for you to remember," she said, her voice like a soft, insidious lullaby. "Remember who you are. Remember why you came here." I tried to step back, to put distance between us, but my legs felt weak, like they couldn't support me anymore. My mind was a blur, my thoughts crashing against each other, trying to make sense of what was happening. I had to remember something. But what? What was she talking about? Suddenly she reached out, her cold fingers brushing against my cheek. It felt like ice, like her touch burned into my skin. My breath hitched in my throat, and I flinched away, but she was too fast, too strong. "You've been running from your past, Emma," she whispered. "But your past is coming for you. It's always been here, waiting." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It was like she was inside my head, twisting my thoughts, forcing me to confront things I didn't understand. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. The room was empty again, the only sound the distant hum of the refrigerator. My chest heaved with panic, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I could feel the coldness lingering, pressing against me, suffocating me. But she was gone. For now, I stood there, alone in the kitchen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind was a whirlwind of questions, each one more terrifying than the last. What did she mean by remember? What was my past? Why had she said I was running from it? I didn't know the answers, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever she was, whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to let me go. And if I didn't figure out what was happening, if I didn't remember what I was running from, it was only a matter of time before she came back. And next time, I wouldn't be able to escape. Story 3. Deadly Words. When you read the curse. It was late, well past midnight, the kind of hour when silence blankets the world and the usual hum of everyday life is replaced by the eerie stillness of night. I was sitting at my desk surrounded by textbooks and papers, trying to finish a last-minute assignment for college. The fluorescent light overhead flickered occasionally, adding an unsettling rhythm to the already uncomfortable atmosphere. The room felt unusually cold, though it was a warm summer night. I couldn't put my finger on why, but something just didn't feel right. Something felt off. I'm a student at a university in a small town in Ohio, far from the city lights, in a place that often felt like it existed in another time, or perhaps another world. The campus is old with buildings that date back to the early 1800s. I've always loved it here, but recently, the charm of the old architecture seemed to have taken on a darker, more sinister air. It had all started a few weeks ago, shortly after I moved into my off-campus apartment. At first, it was the little things. A strange sound at night, like whispers just beyond my reach. Objects I was sure I'd placed in one spot would be found in another. At first, I thought it was just stress or the usual weirdness that comes with adjusting to a new place. But then, it escalated. I had started finding things, notes, letters, hidden in the most unusual places. Crumpled pieces of paper in the back of drawers, folded slips under the floorboards, hidden behind books in the shelves. It was like something, or someone, was trying to get my attention. Tonight, as I sifted through a stack of old papers in my closet, I found something different, something far more disturbing. The letter was folded neatly, with my name scrawled across the front in my own handwriting. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for it, my fingers trembling. I hadn't written this. I was sure of it. But there it was, unmistakably mine. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I unfolded the letter carefully, the creases groaning in protest. The paper was old, yellowed with age, like it had been lying around for years. I could smell the faint scent of dust and something else, something metallic like iron. Blood. I began to read. If you're reading this, I died 4 days ago. The words burned into my mind. My breath hitched in my throat, and for a moment, I thought I might faint. My pulse hammered in my ears as I continued reading. I'm not sure when it happened or how, but I know I'm dead now. And if you're reading this, I need you to understand something. You were never meant to find this letter. The reason you found it is because you've already been marked. There's no escaping it. There's no running from it. I don't know how it will happen, but I know it will. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to close in around me, the air thick with dread. My mind raced. What was this? A prank? No, this didn't feel like a joke. It felt too real, too personal. I glanced around the room, my eyes darting to the corners, as if expecting something or someone to materialize from the shadows. But there was nothing. The silence in the apartment was suffocating, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I read on. The death wasn't an accident. I knew it was coming. I just didn't know when. The signs were there all along, but I ignored them. I was foolish. If you ever come across this letter, it will mean one thing. You're already too late. The letter ended abruptly, but it wasn't the words that haunted me. It was the implication, the terrifying certainty that someone, some force, was after me. I felt it in the air, like a presence pressing against my skin, just out of sight. My breath quickened, and my hands shook as I put the letter down. What was this? Who had written it? And why was it in my room? I tried to calm myself, to think rationally, but the room felt different now. The familiar comfort of my apartment had turned into something foreign, alien. I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel it. Something was watching me. I stood up abruptly, knocking the chair back in my haste. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved toward the window, pulling the curtain aside to peer out into the dark streets. The night was still, not a car in sight, not a single movement, but the letter. That letter had been waiting for me, and that thought gnawed at me, tugging at the edges of my sanity. It was as if someone, something, knew I would find it. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened to the writer of that letter, whatever force had taken their life, was now coming for me. I needed answers, but the more I tried to rationalize it, the more I felt the grip of fear tightening around me. It wasn't just the letter. It was the feeling, the overwhelming sensation that I was in danger, that I had been pulled into something I didn't understand. I reached for my phone, dialing my best friend Sarah. She was always the one to talk me down when my mind started to spiral. Hello? Her voice sounded groggy, like she'd just woken up. Sarah, I need help, I said, my voice shaking. Something's wrong. I found a letter. It's from me. And it says I'm dead. That I died 4 days ago. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she spoke again. You're freaking me out, all right? Just calm down. I'm coming over, okay? We'll figure this out. I hung up, my hands still trembling. I tried to steady my breath, but the air felt thick, suffocating. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in on me. I glanced at the door, half expecting it to burst open, but there was nothing. Just the silence and the growing sense of dread. I turned back to the letter, my gaze lingering on the last few lines. The words seemed to burn into my eyes. You've already been marked. There's no escaping it. I stood frozen, staring at the letter. What did it mean? What was this thing that was coming for me? I didn't know. But one thing was certain. My life had just taken a turn into the unknown, and there was no turning back. The chill in the room deepened, and I could feel my breath coming in short bursts. I glanced over at the clock. It was 1:23 a.m., but that didn't matter anymore. Time was slipping away and I was powerless to stop it. The quiet knocking at the door pulled me from my thoughts. My heart skipped. Sarah had arrived, but when I opened the door, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The hallway was empty, and yet I could hear something, someone, breathing, right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just the letter that would change everything. I stood there, frozen, staring at the doorframe where the knock had just sounded. The apartment was eerily silent, save for the pounding of my own heart in my chest. Sarah was supposed to be here. I had called her in a panic just moments ago, but now there was no sign of her. The hallway outside my apartment was empty, devoid of life, as if the knock had never happened at all. I closed the door behind me with a soft click, my hands shaking. Something wasn't right. The air felt heavy, thick, as though the atmosphere itself had become oppressive, pressing in from all sides. My mind raced, struggling to make sense of it all. The letter, the knock. Why did it feel like I was being watched? And by what? I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. The oppressive quiet in my apartment was deafening. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and grow, curling like tendrils, as if something in the room was coming to life. I turned and glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the dim light. But there was nothing. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing myself to calm down. "You're just paranoid," I muttered under my breath. "It's just the stress. You've been running yourself ragged." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The letter, the knocking, the creeping sense of dread. It all felt too real to dismiss as mere anxiety. Something had changed. And I could feel it deep in my bones, gnawing at me like a slow, painful burn. I walked to my desk and sat down, my fingers resting on the edge of the letter. The words were seared into my mind, and I couldn't escape them. "If you're reading this, I died 4 days ago." My stomach churned as I reread those words, the chill of them sinking deeper into my mind. Who wrote this letter? Why? And how had they known I would find it? I reached for my phone, feeling a surge of panic rising in my chest. My hands fumbled, dropping the device before finally managing to unlock it. I scrolled through my contacts, looking for Sarah's name. I had to talk to her. I needed to hear a familiar voice, something to anchor me to reality. I dialed her number, my fingers trembling as the phone rang. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as I waited for her to pick up. "Hello?" Her voice was groggy, but at least it was a sign of life, a sign that things were still normal. "Sarah, something's wrong. I found a letter, and it says..." My voice cracked as I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I could feel my heart pounding faster, the fear beginning to overwhelm me. "Slow down," she interrupted, her tone sharp but concerned. "What letter? What are you talking about?" "The letter," I repeated, the words tumbling out of my mouth in a frantic rush. "It says I'm dead, that I died 4 days ago. Sarah, I don't know what's going on. I'm scared." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. That's a lot to process, but listen, calm down. I'll be over in a few minutes. Just breathe, okay?" I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Okay, I'll wait for you." I ended the call, but the fear didn't subside. Instead, it seemed to grow, coiling tighter and tighter around me. I walked back to the window, pulling the curtains aside once more to peer into the dark streets. The silence outside seemed too quiet, too still. No cars, no people. Just an empty street that stretched on forever. It was when I turned back to my apartment that I noticed something odd. The letter, the one I had left on the desk, was gone. Panic shot through me, and I rushed to the desk, my mind racing. I scanned the surface, but the letter wasn't there. My eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of it. My heart hammered in my chest as I scanned the floor, the shelves, even the trash can. But there was nothing. The letter had disappeared as if it had never existed at all. I stood frozen, my pulse racing. It couldn't have just disappeared. I had seen it. I had held it. But now, it was as if the letter had been erased from existence. A faint buzzing sound echoed in my ears. A high-pitched whine that made my head spin. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the dread tightened its grip around my throat. "Sarah, where are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, as if the room itself might swallow my words. The clock on the wall ticked louder, the sound unbearable in the silence that surrounded me. I stumbled backward, my mind whirling. I had to leave. I had to get out of this apartment before whatever was happening, whatever had already begun, swallowed me whole. But before I could reach the door, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, though the windows were closed. The lights flickered violently, and then, for a moment, everything went pitch black. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. The silence was suffocating, almost unnatural. It felt like the very air had turned against me. I fumbled for my phone in the darkness, desperate to find some light, but before I could even unlock it, a voice, faint but unmistakable, whispered from the shadows. "You're too late." The words hung in the air, freezing me in place. The voice wasn't Sarah's. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was a voice that seemed to echo from the very walls of the apartment. It wasn't human. It felt ancient, malevolent. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, casting a harsh, sterile light across the room. The apartment looked the same, unchanged, but the air felt different, heavier, as if something had shifted. I turned, expecting to see something, anything, but the room was still empty. The knock on the door, the letter, the voice, all of it seemed to have come from nowhere. And yet, it was all so real, too real. I staggered to the door, my hands trembling as I opened it, half expecting to see someone or something waiting on the other side. But the hallway was still empty. No sign of Sarah. No sign of anyone. I felt a sense of urgency, like I was being drawn into something I couldn't escape. The sensation was suffocating, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The room around me felt alien now, as if it no longer belonged to me. It felt like a place I was trapped in, a place where time no longer made sense. And then, as I stood there in the doorway, the floor beneath me creaked, as if something heavy had shifted in the apartment. Something unseen. That's when I heard it. A soft, steady tapping from behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat. The tapping grew louder, rhythmic, like fingers drumming on a wooden surface. I wasn't alone. The tapping stopped. For a moment, I stood frozen in the doorway, my hands still gripping the doorknob as though it was my only lifeline. The silence was deafening, like the world had paused, holding its breath. Every muscle in my body tensed, my heart pounding in my ears. I waited. Nothing. I forced myself to move, though every step felt like I was walking through molasses. I crept back into the room, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, searching for the source of the tapping. The apartment seemed unchanged, still as empty and silent as it had been moments before. The floors creaked under my feet as I walked across the room, the floorboards groaning, as if the house itself was alive, groaning with age, or maybe something more sinister. The lights flickered again, casting the room into a strobe light pattern. I couldn't tell if I was hallucinating or if the flashing light was trying to tell me something, warn me. But before I could make sense of it, the light steadied, casting a steady, sterile glow once again. I glanced over at my phone on the desk, and for the first time, I realized how long it had been since I called Sarah. The screen was dark. I unlocked it, but there were no new messages, no calls, nothing. I swallowed hard. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening before the fear swallowed me whole. My fingers trembled as I typed out a message to Sarah, asking her to call me back. I pressed send file and then stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the little bubbles to appear, signaling she was replying. But they never did. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me again. The apartment felt even more suffocating now. The air thick with something wrong. My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts crashing together. The letter, the tapping, the voice in the dark. I didn't know who was behind any of this, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just some prank. It wasn't just stress or sleep deprivation. No, something far more sinister had begun to unfurl. I turned to the desk again, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain it all. My eyes scanned the room as I moved toward the shelves. Then I saw it. At the far corner of the desk, beneath a pile of loose papers, there was a small, crumpled envelope. I hadn't noticed it before. My heart leapt into my throat. It couldn't be. Not another letter. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. The paper was brittle, old, like it had been sitting there for years. I could barely make out the writing on the front, but I was certain I had never written this. My name was scrawled across it in jagged, uneven letters. But there was something about the way it looked. Something wrong. It didn't feel like my handwriting. I hesitated for only a moment before I tore it open, the contents spilling onto the desk. Inside was another letter, yellowed with age and covered in what appeared to be smudged ink, as though someone had written it in a hurry. I held my breath as I unfolded the paper. The words were almost too blurry to read, but I made out the message. If you are reading this, it means you are the next. I have passed on, but you're about to enter the same fate. There is no escape. You will die in the same way. You will not remember when, but you will remember how. My pulse quickened as I reread the words, my stomach churning. You will die in the same way. The words echoed in my mind, hammering into my brain like a drumbeat. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and the shadows around me deepened, stretching like hands reaching for me. I dropped the letter, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Who had written this? What did it mean? The pieces of the puzzle seemed to slip just beyond my reach, and the more I thought about it, the more it felt like something or someone was playing with me. Then, just as I was about to get up, the tapping started again. This time, it was louder. It came from the direction of the hallway. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The tapping was distinct, like a steady rhythmic knock against wood. But it wasn't coming from the door. No, it was coming from within the apartment itself. From somewhere deeper inside, from somewhere I couldn't see. I turned toward the hallway, my eyes darting to the darkened doorway. The corridor was empty, the shadows stretching long and thin. But something in the back of my mind screamed that I wasn't alone. The tapping persisted, louder now, echoing through the apartment like the rhythmic ticking of a clock, counting down to something inevitable. I moved slowly, my feet barely making a sound as I tiptoed toward the hallway. The walls seemed to close in around me as I approached the doorway, my heart pounding harder with every step. The air was thick with a coldness I couldn't explain, and my breath came in short, shallow gasps. Then, as I stepped into the hallway, the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the sound itself. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But nothing made sense. I had to get out. I had to get away from this place. From whatever was here with me, I looked to the end of the hallway, where the darkened kitchen sat in silence. And suddenly, I had the urge to check the room. I don't know why I felt that compulsion, but it was like a force pulling me forward, urging me to go. I moved down the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. The kitchen light flickered once, then twice, before I reached the door. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the handle, unsure whether I wanted to open it or flee. Then, as if on cue, the door creaked open on its own. My breath caught in my throat as I stared into the darkness beyond. The kitchen, which had always been brightly lit, was now shrouded in an unnatural blackness. It felt like stepping into the void, into something that shouldn't exist. I stepped inside, my body trembling, and that's when I saw it. A figure. It stood at the far corner of the room, just barely visible in the dim light that flickered above. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the shadows, but then it moved. Slowly, deliberately. A tall figure, hunched over, its form twisted and unnatural. The tapping sound I had heard earlier was coming from this figure, its hands tapping lightly against the surface of the countertop. The figure turned, and in that moment, I saw its face, or what was left of it. It was a face I recognized. It was mine. I staggered backward, my heart racing, as I tried to catch my breath. The figure before me grinned, its face stretching into a grotesque mockery of a smile. I couldn't breathe. My legs gave way, and I collapsed to the floor, staring up at the thing that looked like me but wasn't. It whispered, its voice a rasping, hollow sound. "You were always meant to find this." Then it stepped forward, and I screamed, but there was no sound. Story 4. The scent of the deceased's perfume. The first time I smelled it, I thought it was a figment of my imagination, a mere trick of the senses, something my grief had conjured up to make me feel closer to her. But when the scent came back, it wasn't as fleeting as a memory. It was persistent, unnerving, and over time, it became something far darker than I had ever expected. My name is Emily. I'm 22, and I live in a small house on the outskirts of Ohio, a place I inherited from my mother when she passed away. I thought it would be a sanctuary, a place where I could mourn in peace and try to piece together the broken fragments of my life. I didn't expect it to become a prison of memories and a prison of fear. It started about 2 weeks after my mother's funeral. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something. Every corner seemed filled with shadows that danced just out of sight. It was then that the smell first hit me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, trying to force myself to eat something. when the scent invaded my senses. It was faint at first, a soft floral fragrance, delicate and sweet, like the perfume my mother used to wear. I thought I was imagining it, a trick my mind was playing on me in the wake of her passing. But then it grew stronger, wrapping itself around me, filling the room with its clawing presence. I stood up, my heart racing, and looked around, but there was no one there. The smell lingered for hours that day, and the next, and the next. At first I thought it was just my grief, my mind playing cruel tricks on me. But as the days passed, the scent grew more persistent. It wasn't just the smell that was haunting me. It was the feeling that accompanied it. A cold, oppressive presence that seemed to follow me from room to room. I couldn't escape it. Every night, when I lay in bed, the scent would drift into the room, curling around me like a ghostly embrace. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself that it was just a memory, something my mind was manifesting as I dealt with my loss. But then the dreams started. The first dream was so vivid, so real, that I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding in my chest. I was standing in a dark, unfamiliar place, an old, decaying mansion, its walls lined with cracked mirrors and faded wallpaper. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of perfume lingered in the air. As I walked through the house, the sound of my footsteps echoed in the silence. But there was something off. I couldn't place it, but it felt wrong, like I wasn't alone. I turned a corner and saw her. My mother. She stood at the end of the hallway, her back turned to me, staring out of a cracked window. Her form was shadowy, barely visible, but I could still make out the outline of her familiar figure. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. I took a step forward, but my feet felt heavy, like I was walking through water. That's when I felt it. The coldness in the air, the creeping chill that settled in my bones. I reached out to touch her shoulder, but as my fingers brushed against her, she turned, her face a hollow void, dark, empty eyes staring back at me. "Help me, Emily," she whispered in a voice that wasn't hers. It sounded like it was coming from deep beneath the earth, like it was echoing from the very depths of the house. I woke up gasping for air, my hands clutching the sheets. The scent of perfume still lingering in the air, even though my mother had been gone for weeks. I didn't know what to make of it, but I knew one thing for certain. Something wasn't right. The dreams continued, each one more disturbing than the last. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that house, walking down endless hallways, calling for my mother only to find her standing in the distance, just out of reach. Her face was always hidden, shrouded in darkness, her voice always a whisper, begging for my help. And each time, the scent of her perfume would fill the air, thick and overpowering, like it was suffocating me. It clung to me, followed me into the waking world. And even when I was awake, I could feel its presence, like an invisible force that never left. But there was more. One night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I heard a noise, soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A faint scratching sound coming from the direction of the attic. I sat up, listening intently, my heart racing in my chest. The noise continued, slow and deliberate, as if something or someone was moving around up there. I knew I should have ignored it, but something inside me urged me to investigate. Maybe It was the same force that had driven me to explore the house when I was a child, always looking for answers to questions I wasn't ready to ask. Maybe it was the need to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I grabbed a flashlight and crept up the stairs to the attic. The air was thick with dust, and the floor creaked under my weight as I made my way through the narrow hallway. The scratching sound grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever was up there knew I was coming. I reached the attic door, my hand trembling as I turned the handle. The door creaked open, and the smell of perfume hit me like a wave, suffocating and overpowering. The room was dark, save for the dim beam of my flashlight. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw something, someone, standing in the corner of the room. It was a figure, tall and thin, its face hidden in the shadows. The scent of perfume grew stronger, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. I called out, but my voice trembled with fear, my body frozen in place. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it stepped forward, and I saw the faint outline of a hand reaching out toward me. And then, in a voice that was unmistakably my mother's, it whispered, "It's time, Emily. Come closer." I turned and ran, the sound of my own footsteps pounding in my ears, the scent of perfume trailing behind me, suffocating me with every breath. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The next morning, I woke up in my bed, my heart still racing, the perfume still lingering in the air. It was as if the events of the night before hadn't happened at all, like it had all been a nightmare. But I knew better. The scent was real. The presence was real. And whatever had been waiting for me in that attic was still there, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I had tried to brush it off, to convince myself that it was all just the product of my grief. But the longer I stayed in that house, the more certain I became that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the scent of my mother's perfume. It was everything else. The shadows that moved in the corners of my vision, the way the temperature would drop suddenly, leaving me shivering, the way the house seemed to breathe with a life of its own. It was as though the house itself was watching me, waiting for something I couldn't understand. After that night in the attic, I couldn't bring myself to return to that room. The smell of the perfume lingered for days, thick and suffocating, like a fog I couldn't escape. I had convinced myself that it was just a memory, a reminder of my mother's presence in my life, something that clung to the house after she was gone. But then the dreams came again. The dreams were more vivid now, more intense. In the beginning, I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, the image of my mother's shadowy form still fresh in my mind. But with each passing night, the dreams grew darker. The house in the dreams wasn't just the mansion I had seen the first time. It was my house, the one I lived in. Every detail was the same. The creaky floorboards, the dusty furniture, the faint smell of perfume in the air. But this time, I wasn't walking through the house alone. There were others with me, shadowy figures just out of reach, always lurking just behind me, watching my every move. I could never see their faces, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold and judgmental. Every time I turned around, they would vanish, leaving nothing but the echo of my footsteps in the silence. And then there was her, the figure at the end of the hallway. My mother. But not my mother, not the woman I had known. Her face was always obscured, her eyes hollow, empty. She would call to me, her voice soft and distant, as though she was trying to reach me from the other side of some invisible barrier. "Emily!" She would whisper, her voice barely audible, "Come to me. You must help me." I would wake up every time, gasping for breath, the weight of the dreams pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. I tried to push it all away, to convince myself that it was just my mind, playing tricks on me in the wake of her death. But deep down, I knew better. I knew there was something else in that house with me. Something far darker than I could ever have imagined. One evening, after the scent had grown almost unbearable, I decided to confront it. I couldn't keep running from my mother's ghost, no matter how much I wanted to. I needed to know what was happening in my own home. It wasn't just the perfume that haunted me. It was the feeling of being watched, the feeling of something lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to discover it. I grabbed the flashlight and made my way to the attic again. The weight of the air thick with perfume, pressing down on me as I climbed the narrow staircase. The house seemed to groan in protest, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The closer I got to the attic, the more the temperature seemed to drop, a chill that sank into my bones, making it hard to breathe. When I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The door to the attic was closed, but I could feel the presence beyond it, like something was waiting just on the other side. I could almost hear it, soft whispers like voices in the wind, barely audible but unmistakable. I opened the door. The room was empty, save for the boxes of old belongings my mother had left behind. Dust hung in the air, and the dim light from my flashlight cast long shadows on the walls. The smell of perfume hit me immediately, sharp and overpowering, like a ghost that had settled into the very fabric of the house. It made my head spin, and for a moment, I felt disoriented, like I was no longer in my own world. I stepped into the room, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could swear I felt something brush past me, cold as ice. "Emily." The voice was unmistakable, my mother's voice soft and pleading. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was no one there, just the shadows, shifting and flickering in the corner of my eye. I took a step forward, my breath shallow, my mind racing. The flashlight flickered, its beam cutting through the darkness like a blade, but it couldn't cut through the suffocating silence that enveloped me. The whispers continued, coming from all directions now, like they were surrounding me, closing in. "Emily," I felt it then. The coldness that swept through the room, more intense than ever. My breath came out in visible puffs of mist. The temperature in the room dropping further with each passing second. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, swirling around me, creeping closer and closer, like they were alive. And then I saw her. At the far end of the room, in the corner where the shadows were darkest, my mother's figure stood. Her back was turned to me, and I could see nothing but the outline of her silhouette. She was dressed in the same clothes she had worn at the hospital, the ones I had last seen her in before she passed. The scent of perfume filled the room, thick and suffocating, as I stepped closer. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. I reached out, my hand shaking, and touched her shoulder. The moment I did, I felt the coldness again, like I had touched something that wasn't meant to be touched, something that wasn't alive. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to pull my hand away, but it wouldn't move. My fingers were frozen, as though they were trapped in the grip of something far stronger than I could understand. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls narrowing, the shadows stretching toward me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in the grip of something far more powerful than fear. And then she turned. Her face was not the face I had known, not the face of the mother I had loved. Her eyes were hollow, black holes that stared back at me with an emptiness that made my blood run cold. Her mouth opened, and from it came the whisper, the voice that had been haunting me for weeks. "Help me, Emily." I woke up with a start, gasping for breath, my heart hammering in my chest. I was back in my bed, the familiar comfort of my room surrounding me. But the smell of perfume lingered, thick in the air. The scent was stronger than ever, wrapping around me like a suffocating embrace. I looked around the room, but there was nothing there. No shadows, no figure standing in the corner. But I knew deep down that something was waiting. Something was still in the house with me, and it wasn't going to leave until I figured out what it wanted. And I was running out of time. The days blurred together after that night in the attic, each one more suffocating than the last. The scent of my mother's perfume never left, and neither did the haunting feeling that I was being watched, as if someone was lingering just behind me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to convince myself that it was just my grief, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. The house had changed since my mother's death. It felt alive now, as if it had taken on a will of its own. Every night, I could feel the presence of something in the dark corners of the house. It wasn't just the perfume anymore. It was the shadows, the way they seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking. I'd hear footsteps when no one was there. I'd hear whispers in the silence, too soft to understand, but they were unmistakably there. It was like the house was full of memories. Memories that didn't belong to me. Memories that were reaching out, calling me into the dark. I couldn't escape it. The perfume clung to my skin like a second layer, and no matter how many times I showered, I could still smell it, faintly, in the corners of my room, in the hallway, even in the kitchen, where I tried to cook myself a meal. Anything to distract myself from the creeping fear that had settled in my chest. The whispers had become more frequent, more insistent. I knew I couldn't ignore them any longer. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows crept across the floor, I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. The house was eerily still, and for a moment, I thought I might finally be alone. But then, I heard it again, the soft, unmistakable whisper of my mother's voice. "Emily!" I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The voice wasn't loud, but it wasn't a figment of my imagination either. It was real, and it was coming from somewhere in the house. "Emily, come find me." I stood up, my legs trembling beneath me, and followed the sound of her voice, each step heavy with the weight of the unknown. The house seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in around me as I made my way toward the stairs. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, like it was calling me home. I reached the staircase, and for a moment, I hesitated. The attic door loomed at the top of the stairs, its dark, gaping mouth waiting for me. I knew what I had to do. I had to face whatever was haunting me. I couldn't keep running away, not anymore. Taking a deep breath, I ascended the stairs, my hand gripping the railing as though it could steady my racing pulse. As I reached the top, the temperature dropped again, a bone-chilling cold that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The whispers were no longer faint. They were clear, unmistakable. "Emily, come to me." I reached for the door, my hand trembling. But before I could open it, I heard something behind me. A faint scratching sound. It was soft at first, like the rustling of paper, but then it grew louder, more frantic. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway, the shadows stretching across the floor, reaching out like fingers. I turned back to the door. The whispers grew louder, now mixed with a soft melodic humming. It sounded like a lullaby, something my mother used to hum to me when I was a child. But there was something off about it, something wrong. The song seemed to wrap around me, filling my ears, clouding my thoughts. I opened the door. The attic was dark, the shadows deeper than I had remembered. The smell of perfume hit me like a wall, thick and heavy, suffocating in its intensity. I stepped inside, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the corners of the room. But it couldn't banish the shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. And there, in the far corner of the room, was the figure. The same shadowy outline of my mother. She stood with her back to me, as she always did in the dreams, staring out into the darkness. The air around her shimmered with a cold, unnatural energy, and the scent of perfume grew stronger. "Mom?" My voice was barely a whisper, the word thick with disbelief. She didn't respond. I took a step forward, but my legs felt like lead, each movement slow, as if the house was trying to keep me rooted to the spot. The whispers filled the air, curling around me like a noxious cloud. "Emily." Her voice was faint, distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched her shoulder. The moment I did, a wave of cold washed over me, a cold so intense that it stole the breath from my lungs. I tried to pull my hand away, but it wouldn't move. I was frozen, my fingers locked in place, as if something was holding me there, forcing me to stay. Her head turned slowly, a grotesque, unnatural motion that made my skin crawl. Her face was obscured, shrouded in darkness, but I could see her eyes. Hollow, black voids that stared back at me with an emptiness that made my heart stop. She smiled, but it wasn't a smile I recognized. It was a twisted, hollow grin, like something far darker than my mother had ever been. "You shouldn't have come here, Emily," she whispered, her voice distorted, like it was being dragged from the depths of some terrible place. I recoiled, pulling my hand back as if I had been burned. My heart raced, and my breath came in shallow gasps. The coldness was overwhelming, like the very air was turning against me, suffocating me with each passing second. The room seemed to close in around me. The walls shifted, their angles bending in impossible ways. I could no longer tell where I was, where the house ended, and the nightmare began. The perfume was choking me now, its sickly sweetness filling my lungs, turning my stomach. "You never should have come back," the figure said again, its voice now a rasping, breathless whisper that echoed in my ears. "It was never meant for you." I stumbled backward, my eyes wide, heart thudding in my chest. I tried to run, but my legs refused to move. I was trapped, held in place by the force that surrounded me, the shadows that clung to the walls, the whispers that filled the room. "Mom, please." My voice cracked, desperation filling my words, but it was too late. The room spun, the world around me tilting as the shadows closed in. And then everything went black. I woke up in my bed again, gasping for breath, the familiar scent of perfume still lingering in the air. But the room was silent now. There were no whispers, no shadows, just the stillness of the house, the heavy, oppressive silence that pressed down on me. I knew then that I was no longer just haunted by my mother's memory. I was haunted by something far worse, something that had never left this house, and it wasn't going to let me go. Not until it had what it wanted, and I had no idea what that was. Story 5. Tears of the Monster. The house stood on the outskirts of town, an ancient structure with peeling paint, cracked windows, and an ominous aura that seemed to pull at the very air around it. Its silhouette cast a shadow that stretched over the empty street despite the sun that barely kissed the horizon. I hadn't meant to move here. Not really. But sometimes things just happen. And before you know it, you've walked too far down a path to turn back. It started with a letter. I remember the day I first saw the house clearly. It was a damp afternoon in early fall, and I had just finished my shift at the local diner. As I walked home, my mind drifting between thoughts of the endless days and long hours I'd spent serving coffee to strangers, I noticed something peculiar. There, on my doorstep, sat an old crumpled envelope addressed to me in handwriting that looked as if it had been penned by someone from another time. I hadn't been expecting any letters, so I brought it inside, eager to see what was inside. It was from a lawyer, of all things, notifying me of an inheritance. The name on the letter meant nothing to me. My distant relatives had been dead for years, as far as I knew, but the inheritance was a shock. An old house in a town far from where I had lived all my life, a house I had never even heard of. The letter stated that the house had been left to me by an uncle, someone I could barely remember meeting. There was no mention of why or how, only the cold words, "Come to claim your legacy." So, on a whim, and against my better judgment, I packed up what little I had and drove down to the house. Maybe it was the curiosity that tugged at me, or perhaps the idea of escaping the same old routine. But whatever it was, I couldn't resist. The first time I stepped inside the house, it felt like stepping into a forgotten world. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards creaked under my feet. Everything about it was unsettling. The walls seemed to whisper with the weight of old memories, and every room felt as though it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The house was empty, silent except for the occasional groan of its old frame and the muffled echo of my footsteps. The only sign of life was the strange, persistent smell. It was earthy, like wet stone, mixed with something sweet and metallic. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it made my stomach churn. I spent the first few days simply exploring the rooms, trying to make sense of the space. There was nothing extraordinary about it at first glance. The kitchen was small and outdated, with a rusted stove that looked as though it hadn't been used in years. The living room had an old fireplace, its stone cracked and cold. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with the house. Something I couldn't name. The cellar door caught my attention one evening. It had been left ajar, as though inviting me in. I stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into the darkness below. My mind raced with possibilities. Rats, cobwebs, maybe even old furniture covered in sheets. But something told me there was more down there. I wasn't sure why I felt this way, but it was as though the house itself was pushing me to explore its secrets. Reluctantly, I descended. The air was colder down there, thick with dampness and the faint smell of something decaying. The flickering light from my flashlight barely pierced the gloom as I made my way deeper into the cellar. There, at the far end of the room, was a massive water reservoir, an old stone structure that seemed out of place in a basement. It was dry for the most part, save for a small pool of water at the bottom. But what struck me wasn't the pool itself. It was the tears. I stared in horror as drops of water fell from the surface of the stagnant pool, splashing onto the floor with a sickening sound. The water was no longer clear. It was dark, deep red, like blood. Each drop that splashed onto the stone floor seemed to echo, reverberating through the quiet cellar, filling the air with a suffocating sense of dread. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Blood tears. From an underground water reservoir in the basement of an old house. It didn't make sense, but there it was, dripping relentlessly, as if the house itself was weeping for something long buried. I rushed back upstairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house felt even colder now, its walls closing in on me as I tried to process the bizarre sight I had just witnessed. I couldn't bring myself to go back down there. Not yet, but I knew, deep down, that I would have to. There was something I needed to understand, something I couldn't ignore. The house was hiding something, and I was bound to uncover it. As I lay in bed that night, trying to block out the image of the blood like tears, I heard it. A soft hum, barely audible, but unmistakable. It came from the walls, or maybe from somewhere deeper, beneath the house or inside it. I couldn't tell. It was like a song, a mournful melody, echoing through the silence of the night. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to shut out the noise, but it wouldn't stop. It was as though the house was calling to me, urging me to listen, to uncover whatever it was that had caused it to cry. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the shadows that danced on the walls, wondering what kind of monster could cause a house to weep blood. And more importantly, who or what was waiting for me in the dark. Tomorrow, I would go back to the cellar. I had to. There was no escaping it. But the question gnawed at me. If I uncovered the truth, would I be able to live with it? The tears kept falling, and I feared that soon I would learn why. The morning after the discovery in the cellar, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had changed overnight. The walls felt thicker, more oppressive, and the air inside seemed heavier, pressing against my chest with every breath I took. It was as if the house knew I had seen something it wasn't ready to show. And now it was watching me, waiting for me to uncover more. I spent the next few hours wandering through the rooms, attempting to distract myself from the eerie sensation creeping under my skin. The sunlight barely managed to filter through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the old furniture. Nothing felt familiar. The house seemed like it had a life of its own, alive in ways that I couldn't understand, breathing and shifting as though it was sentient. I had no intention of going back down to the cellar. Not yet. But as the hours passed, the gnawing curiosity inside me grew stronger, pulling at me like a magnetic force. I found myself back at the basement door, standing at the top of the stairs once again. The house felt quieter today, as if holding its breath, waiting for my next move. The strange hum, the song I had heard last night, had stopped, but its absence felt just as unsettling. I knew that I needed to uncover the truth. I couldn't live with the nagging uncertainty, but I didn't expect what I would find. As I descended into the cellar, the temperature dropped immediately, the air thick with dampness and decay. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the stone walls as I approached the reservoir. The pool of water sat there, undisturbed, but something about it felt different this time. The water was darker, the color so deep that it seemed to suck in the light, making the edges of the pool look like a bottomless abyss. I hesitated for a moment, standing at the edge, watching as the blood-red tears dripped steadily from the surface. The sound of them hitting the floor was deafening in the silence. A rhythmic blink, blink, blink that seemed to echo throughout the entire cellar. But it wasn't the tears that drew my attention this time. It was the whisper. A soft, breathy sound that slithered through the air, barely audible at first, like a voice just beyond my reach. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around, searching the dark corners of the room. There was no one there. No one but me and the cold stone walls. The whisper came again, closer this time, but no clearer. It was as though the house itself was speaking to me, its voice coming from the very stones beneath my feet. I took a step back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Panic began to claw at my chest, but I couldn't tear myself away from the pool. There was something hypnotic about it, something that pulled me in despite the fear that churned in my stomach. I crouched down, my eyes locked on the water. The tears continued to fall, their crimson hue now swirling in the dark liquid. And then, just as I thought I had imagined it, a shape began to form in the center of the pool. A figure, vague and shifting, as though the water itself was trying to hold the image together. A face. It was brief at first, just a fleeting glimpse, but the horror of it froze me in place. The face was distorted, almost inhuman, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It was wrong, unnatural. I couldn't breathe. The air in the cellar had thickened, pressing down on me with an invisible weight. And then it was gone. The figure vanished, leaving only the blood-red water behind. My pulse hammered in my ears, and my body trembled as I stumbled back toward the stairs. My legs felt like jelly, and I had to grip the railing just to keep myself from falling. As I reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the quiet of the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Something ancient and patient, lurking just out of sight. I was alone, yet the house felt crowded, as though there were eyes watching me from every corner. I had no idea what I had seen in the water, but I knew one thing. I couldn't leave. Not yet. The unease had settled deep within me, a constant, gnawing presence that kept me awake for hours each night. The nights grew longer, colder, and the whispers in the walls started again. They were faint at first, just barely there, but each night they grew louder, clearer. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I swore I could hear footsteps moving through the house when I was alone. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I met her. Marissa, she came to the house like a shadow, her figure drifting through the hallway, barely visible in the darkness. I had been sitting by the window, staring out into the empty street, when I saw her reflection in the glass. She was standing in the doorway, looking straight at me. I jumped to my feet, my heart leaping into my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, but she didn't respond. She only stood there, staring at me, her face pale and expressionless. I moved cautiously toward her, my body frozen with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice shaky. She didn't speak, but her eyes shifted toward the hallway, as though she were beckoning me to follow. My body moved of its own accord, a strange pull forcing me toward her. I walked down the hallway, past the rooms I had grown familiar with, until we reached the cellar door. She stopped in front of it, and I could hear the faint sound of the tears falling from the reservoir below. Her fingers brushed lightly against the door, as though she had been here before. "You must go down," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a soft echo in the dark. "You must see it." I shook my head, fear rising in my throat. "No, I can't. I've already seen enough." But she only smiled, a cold, hollow smile that made my skin crawl. "It's not enough until you understand," she said softly. "Until you see what's waiting." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I couldn't move, my feet glued to the floor. The pull was too strong. The house was calling to me, and Marissa was its messenger. With trembling hands, I opened the cellar door, the chill of the darkness rushing up to meet me. She stepped in first, and I followed, unable to resist. As we descended the stairs, the whispering grew louder, more urgent, until it became a chorus of voices, all overlapping, all crying out. And then, just as I reached the bottom, I saw it again. The figure, emerging from the pool, clearer now, more distinct. It was smiling. It was waiting. And I understood then, as the water began to ripple and the tears fell faster, that the house was not just alive. It was alive with hunger. And it was waiting for me to feed it. The air in the cellar was thick, suffocating even. The cold that had settled in my bones seemed to deepen with every breath I took. I stood frozen at the foot of the stairs, staring at the dark pool of blood-red water in front of me. The silent tears continuing to fall, blink, 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 like a haunting metronome marking the passage of time. Marissa had already stepped forward, her figure just barely visible in the dim light, her eyes locked on the surface of the water. She didn't seem to notice me, or if she did, it didn't matter. She was already consumed by whatever force had drawn her here. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. I didn't expect an answer, but I needed to say it, needed to release the question from the tight grip it had on my chest. Marissa turned her head, her expression unreadable. "It's the heart of the house," she said softly. "The monster, the one that weeps, the one that waits. It feeds on what's buried beneath, what's forgotten, what's never meant to be remembered. I could feel her words pressing down on me, suffocating the air in my lungs. The silence that followed felt oppressive, as though the house itself had stopped breathing, holding its breath in anticipation. I took a step closer to the pool, my feet moving on their own, as if I were being drawn into its pull. The tears from the water seemed to speed up, dripping faster now, their color deepening, almost black. The room felt colder, impossibly so, and I could hear a low hum, almost like a vibration in the walls. I reached out a trembling hand, hovering just above the surface. For a moment, everything went still. My heart stopped, my breath caught in my throat. The hum intensified, and I could feel something beneath the water, something stirring, something alive. A voice, soft and distant, brushed against my mind. Come closer. I jerked my hand back, stumbling away from the pool. Fear surged in my veins, but the pull of the house, the force that had been calling me since the moment I stepped inside, was growing stronger. The weight of it was unbearable, pushing me forward, suffocating my will to resist. I had to understand what was happening. I had to know why this house, why this place, felt so alive. I glanced at Marissa. Her face was pale, almost ghostly. Her eyes glazed over, as if she were in a trance. She was watching the pool intently, her fingers twitching at her sides. I felt an eerie connection to her, as though we were both trapped in the same nightmare, our fates bound together by the same cursed house. I don't understand, I said, my voice shaking now, the words struggling to escape my throat. What does it want from us? Why are we here? Marissa didn't respond immediately. She took a step closer to the pool, and then another, her eyes never leaving the water's surface. It wants everything, she said, her voice low, almost reverent. It wants what we've forgotten, the pieces of us we've buried so deep that we can't even remember them anymore. It doesn't care about the living or the dead. It only wants the things we refuse to see, the monsters we hide inside. I took a shaky breath, my chest tight. Monsters, I echoed, my mind struggling to comprehend what she was saying. What do you mean? Marissa's face softened, a faint, almost wistful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. We all have monsters, she whispered. Things we've done, things we've been. The house, it feeds on that. It's a collector of memories, a keeper of all the things we want to forget. And it never forgets. Never. Her words rang in my ears, sinking into my skin, burrowing into the deepest parts of me. The weight of what she said pressed on my chest, suffocating me with a realization I wasn't ready to face. The house had known me. It had known my secrets before I even set foot inside. And now, it was calling me to face them, to confront the darkness I had spent my whole life running from. I stepped back from the pool, the cold stone floor beneath me unsteady, as if the ground itself was shifting, preparing to swallow me whole. I couldn't breathe. The house was closing in on me, its presence pressing against me from all sides. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of here, but I couldn't move. My legs felt as though they were made of stone, immobile, frozen in place. And then I heard it again, the whisper, the same voice that had brushed against my mind moments before. Come closer. This time, it wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. I turned toward the source of the voice, my eyes scanning the cellar. The walls, once cold and lifeless, now seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The cracks in the stone walls glowing faintly, with an otherworldly light. The air was thick with the scent of decay, the smell of something ancient and foul, like rot from deep within the earth. The ground beneath me trembled, as if the house itself was waking up. Marissa was gone. I turned to find her, panic flooding my chest, but she wasn't in the room anymore. The shadows where she had stood seemed darker, deeper, as though they had swallowed her whole. A sudden chill ran down my spine, and I realized, with a sickening jolt, that I was completely alone. I was not alone. The whisper was louder now, and with it came a deep rumbling, like the earth shifting beneath my feet. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing heavier, more oppressive with every passing second. I turned, searching the cellar for any sign of Marissa. But there was only the pool, the tears still falling, still bleeding into the stone floor. And then I saw it. A shadow, blacker than the darkness itself, moved across the far wall. It was shapeless, but it was unmistakably there, slithering, creeping, inching closer to me. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat growing louder, faster, more frantic. I could feel it, the presence in the room, watching me, waiting for me to make my move. I backed away, stumbling toward the stairs, but the shadow followed, its tendrils reaching out, curling around the air like fingers made of smoke. It was cold, colder than the house itself, and the closer it got, the more I felt it. Its hunger. It wanted something from me. It wanted everything from me. "Marissa!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Help me!" But there was no answer. Only the hum, the song, the pull. The shadow surged forward, faster now, its form becoming more solid, more distinct. It was something that shouldn't exist, something that shouldn't be. I could feel it inside me, crawling under my skin, digging into the very marrow of my bones. It was inside my mind, taking over, forcing me to remember things I didn't want to see. And then, just as I thought I would be swallowed whole, the pool erupted. Water, no, blood, rose from the depths, swirling around me, rising higher, faster, until it reached my waist, my chest, my neck. I gasped, choking on the liquid, trying to push it away, but it was too strong. The house was too strong. "Come closer," it whispered, over and over again. And I did. I stepped forward into the water, my body moving on its own, my mind hazy with fear and desperation. I had no choice. There was nothing else I could do. The house had already claimed me, and as I sank into the pool, the darkness embraced me, pulling me under, swallowing me whole. The last thing I heard before the world went black was the sound of Marissa's voice, echoing in my mind. "It's not enough until you understand." And I knew, with horrifying clarity, that the house had never let me go. It had been waiting for me all along. Story 6. My mom called me after she died. I never expected my dead mother to call me. Not metaphorically, not in a dream. I mean, she actually called me, on my cell phone. The same number that I've had since college. The call came at 3:17 a.m. That impossible, godless hour where even the wind seems afraid to breathe. I was already awake, sweating, heart pounding from a nightmare I couldn't quite remember. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. I thought it was spam, but the caller ID read, "Mom." Now, that might sound harmless, unless you've buried your mother 10 months ago in the snow-covered soil of Rose Hill Cemetery. Unless you watched her casket lower into the earth, heard the thud of earth hitting polished wood, and sign the death certificate yourself. Still half asleep, I stared at the screen. Then I answered. A dry hiss bled into my ear, like someone inhaling through cracked lips. Then a faint voice, grainy and distant, like it traveled through layers of dirt. Don't be afraid, Emily. I froze. It was her voice. Not an imitation. Not something like her. It was her. My mother. I'm coming back. I sat up in bed, the blankets falling to my waist. Who is this? Not as a ghost, she whispered almost gently. As you. The line went dead. The days that followed didn't return to normal. Something had shifted. I began to feel wrong in my body. Not sick, not injured, just not alone. I'd catch my reflection in mirrors turning toward me before I moved. When I brushed my teeth, I noticed my left eye twitch ever so slightly out of sync with the right. My memories began to distort. Simple things. The way my childhood bedroom looked, the color of my prom dress, the sound of mom's laugh, they all started to morph. I work remotely as a graphic designer, so I thought maybe it was the isolation. Too much time indoors, too much coffee, not enough sunlight. I called my friend Jordan, a therapist who always offered practical advice without judging. You've been under a lot of stress, Em. Grief doesn't follow a timeline. The subconscious can do some strange things to process trauma. But this feels external, I said, like something's moving around inside my mind, rearranging things. He went quiet. Emily, have you been taking your sleep meds again? I hadn't. Not since the night of the call. I was too scared I wouldn't wake up. On the 5th night, I returned to my mother's house. It had been left to me in the will, but I never moved in. Something about it felt preserved, like time itself refused to flow through the halls. I only came to grab the jewelry box she'd always kept in the hallway armoire, the one shaped like a cathedral where she stored trinkets from her travels. But when I opened it, the box was empty, except for a single folded note, yellowed like it had aged decades and days. The note was in her handwriting. I knew that cursive anywhere. It begins with the bones. Mine are still warm. You will feel them soon. I dropped the note. My breath caught in my throat. Something creaked above me. The attic. The house had always been strange, even when I was a child. My mother insisted on keeping certain doors locked, never explaining why. She'd hang bells on her bedroom window, claiming it kept the drifters away. Once, when I asked what drifters meant, she just said, those who try to ride back with the dead. In the attic, I found boxes stacked like forgotten memories. Dust clung to everything like cobwebs that had grown fat with time. But at the far end, beneath a moth-eaten quilt, I found an old full-length mirror. It wasn't like the ones you'd find at antique stores. This one had carvings, not decorative flourishes, but etched symbols. Circles inside triangles, runes that hurt my head the longer I looked. And the glass itself seemed wrong, darker than it should be, almost like it absorbed light. I felt an overwhelming urge to look into it. When I did, I didn't see myself. I saw her, my mother, standing in the reflection, wearing my clothes. Her expression was vacant except for her eyes. Her eyes were alive. I'm not trying to hurt you, she said softly. But you're wasting this body. I stumbled backward. My foot caught a floorboard, and I landed hard, breaking the silence with a thud. When I looked up, the mirror was just a mirror. Just me, pale and breathless. But for the briefest moment, my reflection smiled before I did. Things escalated quickly after that. My memories started blacking out in chunks. I'd find myself in the shower with no recollection of getting there. Food would appear in the fridge that I didn't remember buying. I even found a Polaroid of myself, sleeping in my own bed, taken from the corner of the room. I live alone. I brought Jordan over. He tried to help. You're probably experiencing dissociation. We can get help. Real help. This doesn't have to be supernatural, Em. That's when he found the second note, tucked under my pillow. It read, "You invited me when you answered the phone." His face went pale. "You didn't write this?" "No," I whispered. He stood there in silence. Then he slowly backed away from me, like he was watching something crawl beneath my skin. Later that night, I tried not to sleep. I took caffeine pills. I turned on all the lights. But sometime after 2 a.m., I must have dozed off. I dreamed. Or maybe I woke into a world covered in fog. A single street stretched forward, lined with old houses, none of which had windows. My mother stood in the center, arms out, her voice echoing from every direction. "You weren't born. You were chosen. This body was mine first." I screamed at her, begged her to stop, but my voice came out as hers. Then I looked down at my hands. They were aging rapidly, wrinkling, shriveling, turning into hers. And I heard her whisper again, "I'm already in. You just haven't let go yet." The morning after the dream, I woke up with dirt under my fingernails. Not just a little, packed deep into the nail beds, black and earthy, like I'd clawed through grave soil. My sheets were torn, my pillow soaked through with sweat, and on the nightstand, in perfect cursive handwriting, was another note that hadn't been there the night before. "You're starting to feel how cold the earth can be. But don't worry, I've made space for you." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. That would have meant I was still someone else. Someone untouched. But that morning, I realized something had cracked inside me. There was room. I didn't tell Jordan what happened. I couldn't. After he saw the second note and the look on my face, he'd started keeping his distance. He'd check in by text, but something unspoken had shifted. Maybe he saw it in my eyes. The subtle way they lingered too long in the mirror. The way I sometimes forgot how to blink. So I called someone else. A woman named Celia Marks. She was a former anthropologist who specialized in what she called unanchored consciousness. We'd met once at a lecture series when I was in college. She'd spoken about inheritance through possession in pre-colonial African and Appalachian folklore. I remembered she used a phrase I didn't understand at the time. When the body becomes a house with too many keys, Celia agreed to meet me at a diner just outside of town. She looked older than I remembered, skin like worn leather, but eyes sharp as a scalpel. She didn't even say hello when she sat across from me. Just stared like she was reading the heat behind my eyes. "You've been touched," she said. I swallowed hard. "I think my mother's trying to come back." She didn't blink. "Not trying. She already is." I looked around. No one else in the diner seemed to notice how cold it had gotten. My breath was fogging up the window beside me. "She said she's not coming as a ghost," I whispered. "She said she'd come as me." Celia nodded slowly. "Then your mother didn't pass. She transitioned. There's a difference." I asked her what that meant. She didn't die the way we understand it, she said. She transferred, like stepping out of one room and into another. Celia came back to the house with me. She brought a small cloth pouch filled with salt, dried herbs, and what looked like bone fragments. She's using mirrors, she said, circling the bedroom. Mirrors are passageways when the soul refuses to settle. She covered every reflective surface with white muslin. Then she opened the cloth pouch and began scattering salt in a precise circle around my bed. She's moving in stages. First the thoughts, then the dreams, then the body. You're somewhere between stage 2 and 3. I sat down numb. How do I stop her? You can't, she said, but you can negotiate. That night, I was instructed not to speak, not to open the door, not to uncover the mirrors, not to react, no matter what happened. Anything she says, anything she looks like, Celia warned, is bait. I lay in bed as the sun fell, shadows creeping up the walls like ink bleeding through paper. The silence wasn't comforting. It vibrated. I could feel it under my skin, between the silence of my breaths, in the hollow behind each heartbeat. And then, sometime after midnight, she began knocking. At first it was gentle, a single knock, then 2, then 3, then silence, then a voice. Emily, it's Mom, let me in, baby. I bit down on my tongue to keep from answering. I brought your blanket, the yellow one with the ducks. Remember how it used to make you feel better? I pressed my hands over my ears. I'm scared out here, Emmy. It's cold where I am. Why won't you help me? The next morning, Celia was gone. Not just from the room, from everything. Her car was still in the driveway, her bag on the chair, but her phone was dead, and her coat was draped neatly over the back of the couch, like someone had placed it there after removing it from her body. I searched the whole house. Nothing. But in the attic, I found the mirror uncovered. A smear of red across the glass. Not blood, but lipstick. Written in the same handwriting as the notes. You waited too long. By the end of the week, I stopped sleeping. The more I resisted, the stronger she became. I could feel her presence, like a second skin stretching beneath mine. Sometimes I'd lose time, hours. Once, I found myself in the woods behind my mother's house, barefoot with no memory of how I got there. But the worst part, the truly terrifying part, came when I heard my own voice. Not out loud, from the inside, talking back to me. I'm not your enemy, it would say, smooth as silk. We're the same. Don't you feel how perfect this could be? I began locking myself in at night, bolting the windows, sleeping with kitchen knives under the bed. But every morning, I'd find the locks undone. The blades moved, never missing, just rearranged, like someone was testing me. Then came the final message. It wasn't on paper. It was in my handwriting, carved into the wall above my bed, done with something sharp. You were never meant to keep this body forever. I stared at it for a long time. I couldn't remember writing it. But I also couldn't deny something deep in my gut. A strange, terrifying agreement. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Me, as a child, lying beside my mother on a winter night. She was brushing my hair. I must have been 8. You're not like other little girls, she'd whispered. You are made special. One day, I'll tell you why. What if she always knew this would happen? What if I was never meant to be just me? What if I was raised to be a vessel? The next night, I gave up fighting. I lit candles. I uncovered the mirror. I sat before it and stared. Not with fear, but with something else. curiosity. My reflection blinked when I didn't, and then it smiled. Finally, it said, using my mouth, my voice. We can begin. I thought surrendering would make it easier, that if I gave her space, willingly, the struggle would stop, that maybe she just needed acknowledgement or closure, or whatever restless spirits need when they press their weight into the living. But it didn't bring peace. It brought blurring. The lines between us weren't redrawn. They dissolved. And now I can't tell where my body ends and hers begins. It started subtly. I would speak, and halfway through a sentence, forget what I was saying. Not because I lost the thought, but because the voice coming out didn't sound like mine. Not just tone, intention. I'd mean to say, I'm scared, and instead say, it's time. Once, I caught myself humming a lullaby I hadn't heard since I was 6. A Polish tune my mother used to sing when she thought I was asleep. I didn't remember the lyrics, but suddenly, I knew all of them, even the verses she never taught me. Then came the days without memory. I'd lose entire afternoons. I'd come to and realize I was standing in front of the old church downtown, my hands clasped as if in prayer, eyes raw from crying. Other times I'd wake in the garden behind my mother's house, kneeling in the dirt, nails broken, hands muddy, as though I'd been burying something or digging something up. And then there were the visits, not hallucinations, not dreams, but visits. They started with him. His name was Father Reuben, though he never introduced himself. He showed up on my porch one rainy evening, his black coat dripping, his eyes hidden under the brim of a soaked hat. You called for me, he said. I didn't, I replied, already knowing I had. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, walked straight into the living room like he'd been there before. There's more than one inside you, he muttered, sniffing the air like it told him secrets. But only one wants to stay. I thought it was just her, I said. My mother? His lips thinned. You don't house a ghost, Miss Fletcher. You host a breach, and breaches attract. I asked him what that meant. He took out a small wooden crucifix and dipped it in a vial of clear oil. Then, without warning, pressed it against my forehead. It burned, not metaphorically. I screamed. It sizzled against my skin like a hot brand. The smell of scorched flesh filled the room, and in that moment, I heard her shriek. Not from my mouth, not aloud, from inside. You're hurting her, I shouted. No, Reuben growled. She's hurting you. He left that night with a warning. She's not the only one in the mirror. I stopped using mirrors after that. Covered them all again. Even the ones I'd forgotten about. Pocket compacts, phone cameras, spoons. I couldn't bear the idea of seeing something that might not be me. But even that wasn't enough. She didn't need the mirrors anymore. She had me. A week later, I woke up on the floor of my bathroom. My reflection had been drawn in lipstick on the mirror. But it wasn't my face. It was hers, only older, hollowed out, like something that had rotted and come back hungry. And beside the image, written in a different color, we are nesting. I started noticing changes in my behavior. I'd recoil from garlic without understanding why. I'd snap at Jordan's texts, even when they were kind. I started craving things I'd never eaten. Liver, raw onions, bone marrow. Once, I caught myself boiling eggs with the shells still on. Something my mother used to do, insisting it preserved the energy inside. The body, remembers things the mind never knew. And now, I wasn't sure which body I was in anymore. Desperate, I called my aunt, my mother's sister. We hadn't spoken since the funeral, not because of any rift, but because grief does that to people. I asked her if there was anything she knew that might help me understand. There was a long silence on the line. "I hoped you'd never have to ask," she said. Then she told me the story. When my mother was 18, she died. Only for 3 minutes, during a drowning incident while hiking with friends. They pulled her out, revived her. She'd been lucky, everyone said. But she was never the same. She used to be warm, gentle, my aunt said. After that day she changed. Not overnight, gradually. But she became colder, more private. Started writing in journals we weren't allowed to read. I asked if those journals still existed. "I burned them after the funeral," she admitted. She asked me to. Said no one should ever read them. But I kept one page. She scanned it and sent it to me. It was a passage written in thick, slanted script. It read, "The body does not belong to the one who occupies it, but to the one who last remembers it being theirs." Underneath, scribbled hastily, "When I return, let it be in her. Let it be me, through her." The page was dated 2 months before I was born. I realized then that this had never been about death. It was about continuity. She hadn't just planned to return. She had planted me, like a seed. I wasn't a daughter. I was a container, a vessel, shaped from blood and womb, to give her a way back. And now, she was inside, not knocking anymore, not whispering, writing thoughts in my mind. I've started speaking to her. I don't know if it's healthy or a trap, but it helps me sort what's mine and what's hers. I sit in front of the fireplace at night and ask questions. She never answers directly, but I feel her shift, like someone pacing in the attic above me. "Why me?" I asked last night, and a single word floated through me. Not a voice, not quite, just knowing. "Because you never fought me." Now, I'm beginning to wonder, what if I stopped being afraid? What if instead of resisting her, I enter the space where she hides? Not to surrender, but to see. Maybe she's not the only one with a key. Maybe, just maybe, I can find my way to where she's hiding inside me and lock her out, even if it means breaking parts of myself along the way. Story 7. The corpses in the morgue are stirring in the dark. There's a quiet in morgues that doesn't exist anywhere else. Not even libraries or old churches come close. It's not the kind of silence that makes you feel peaceful. It's the kind that presses down on your chest, like you've entered a place where sound itself refuses to linger. My name's Michael Hartley. I've been working at the Weatherford County Morgue in upstate New York for almost 9 years. Not the job most people dream of, I know, but I've always preferred the company of the dead. They don't lie. They don't judge. They just exist, or at least that's what I believed. Until last Tuesday. It started with case 77. I just finished processing the paperwork for a car crash victim. Male, early 30s, no ID, no family yet contacted. They'd pulled him from a mangled truck off Route 209, what was left of him anyway. What was strange though, what I noticed right away, was his face. No bruises, no blood, no impact trauma. From the chest down, his body looked like someone had put him through a meat grinder. But from the shoulders up, pristine. That bothered me. The coroner on call Dr. Lynn Mayer chalked it up to seatbelt positioning and angle of collision. Sometimes the body absorbs the shock unevenly, she said, without even looking up from her tablet. I nodded, but I didn't buy it. Something about the man's expression didn't sit right with me. His mouth hung slightly open, not in the slack-jawed way I'm used to, but like he had been mid-sentence. His brow was faintly furrowed, and his eyelids were only almost closed. As I wheeled him into room B for embalming prep, the overhead lights flickered. A quick stutter, like they always did when the building's ancient heating system kicked on. That morgue has always had electrical quirks. I slid the gurney beside the prep table and began transferring him. That's when I felt it. Not a sound, not a whisper, a sensation, like someone was behind me. I turned fast, enough that I nearly dropped my tray of instruments. No one, just cold steel shelves and the white tile wall. The vent above me clicked, hissing warm air into the room. I looked back at the body. The eyes were wide open. Now, I've seen this before. Bodies sometimes undergo muscle spasms. Eyelids can flutter open from air pressure, especially if they weren't fully sealed during intake. But I swear to God, he wasn't looking up. He was looking at me, staring. His pupils were glassy, like normal, but behind the glass, it was like intent, as if the man inside had just woken up. I walked over, leaned in, held my breath. No movement, no breathing, no pulse, just the stare. I reached for the eyelid tape, ready to seal them shut, when I noticed something even more unsettling. His pupils were dilated. That doesn't happen post-mortem, not like that. Pupils go cloudy, milky, and eventually collapse. This man's eyes were sharp, dark, alive. I backed up, accidentally bumping into a tray of tools behind me. The crash echoed too loudly in the empty room. I exhaled through gritted teeth, mentally cursing my nerves. It's just post-mortem response, I muttered aloud. Don't be stupid, Mike. Still, I stepped back. For the first time in my career, I turned the gurney around so the corpse wasn't facing me while I worked. Hours passed. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I processed 3 more bodies that day, but every time I passed room B, I swore I could feel something watching. Not hear, not see, feel. That night I skipped my usual gas station coffee stop, drove straight home, locked every door and window, something I never did before. And still, I couldn't sleep. At around 2:40 a.m., I got a notification on my phone. Morgue motion. Detected room B. I froze. The cameras. We'd had them installed 2 months ago after a break-in scare. Their motion triggered, low res, mostly for insurance purposes. I tapped the notification. The screen loaded. The room was empty, almost. I saw the gurney. I saw case 77. Still there. Still lying flat. But this time, his head was turned toward the camera. I blinked, rewound the footage. 30 seconds earlier, head forward. Live feed, head turned. I didn't go back that night. I couldn't. I told myself I'd address it in the morning. Maybe check if someone was messing with me. Dr. Mayer sometimes liked to test new interns with morbid pranks, though this would have been a bit extreme even for her. The next morning, I returned to room B with shaking hands. He was in the same position I'd left him, eyes closed, head forward. But something was different. Underneath his right hand, I saw a smudge of red. Not blood, it was too dry. I lifted the hand. Beneath it, written in uneven strokes on the metal table, I see you. I dropped the hand, stepped back. I wanted to believe it was a joke, someone trying to scare the night shift guy. Then I checked the logs. No one had accessed Room B since my last entry. No keycard pings, no maintenance scheduled. No one else had even been in the building. I started hearing whispers 3 days later. They weren't voices I recognized. They didn't come from the vents or the halls. They came when I was alone, mostly in the prep rooms. Faint, dragging syllables. Sometimes they said names, other times just breathing. But always, I'd look around and see nothing. Nothing but the corpses. And sometimes, their eyes wide, dark, watching. I haven't told anyone yet. I'm writing this down now in case I'm losing my mind, or in case something worse is happening. Because I swear, last night, when I checked the freezer for Case 77's final placement, the drawer was empty, and carved into the inside of the door, just above where his head would have rested, was the same message. I see you, Mike. I didn't tell anyone the drawer was empty. What was I supposed to say? That a corpse went for a walk? That the eyes of a mangled man stared at me from the shadows of my dreams and then disappeared from cold storage like he had somewhere to be? No. That's how you end up in psych evaluation, not payroll. Instead, I shut the door quietly, walked out of the freezer, and pressed my back against the wall. The steel felt cold through my uniform, but not grounding. Nothing felt real anymore. Not the buzzing of the overhead lights. Not the faint scent of formalin hanging in the air like mildew and bleach. Just him, that missing body. And those words, I see you, Mike. I stood there breathing in shallow gulps until I heard the front morgue door creak open. A voice echoed down the hallway. Mike, you here? It was Ellis, one of the night shift janitors, ex-military quiet type. He usually didn't show up until after 10 p.m. Something about his early arrival made my skin crawl. Yeah, I called back, straightening. I'm here. He rounded the corner, mop in one hand, the other holding a Dunkin' cup. He nodded toward me, eyes scanning my face. You okay? You look off. Rough night, I mumbled. One of the bodies was mislabeled, gave me a scare. He didn't push. Ellis wasn't the talkative type. But as he walked past me and into the freezer to start cleaning the storage trays, I wanted to scream at him. Don't go in there. Instead, I just stood still, waited, counted. 3 seconds, 10, 30. Ellis reappeared, wiping his hands on a cloth. Drawer 5's empty. That normal? I opened my mouth. No sound came out. Then finally, yeah, they moved him for autopsy this morning. Must have forgotten to log it. He gave me a look but said nothing. I was becoming a good liar. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I didn't want to, but because every time I almost drifted off, I'd see him. Not in vivid dreams, no. In the black spaces between blinking and waking. He was always standing in the corner of the room, silent, watching. In one blink, he'd be by the dresser. The next, at the foot of the bed. I began leaving the lights on, started taking sleeping pills, but they only dulled my reflexes. The shadows didn't care how exhausted I was. They still moved. The next day at work, I checked the camera logs again. I'd become obsessed with the footage from Room B and the freezer corridor. At exactly 3:33 a.m., on the night the body vanished, the cameras recorded 3 seconds of static. Just 3. No other movement before or after. When the feed returned, the door to the freezer was ajar. Security claimed it was a glitch, that those things happened all the time. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I enhanced a frame from 332:59. The moment right before the static hit, there, barely visible in the corner of the freezer, crouched low to the floor, was a shape. His shape, the same jawline, the same dark, bloodless eyes, bent backward in an inhuman angle like someone halfway through standing or crawling. I zoomed in until the pixels broke, closed the tab, slammed the laptop shut. I was losing it. I went to Dr. Mayer's office around noon. Not because I wanted help, but because I needed to see someone, anyone, who still seemed tethered to reality. Her office was cramped, lined with jars of preserved specimens and old pathology books. She was eating a tuna sandwich behind a stack of toe tags. "Mike," she said, mouth half full, "you look like you haven't slept in days." "Yeah," I said, sitting without being asked. "Can I ask you something? About bodies, about what happens after death?" She raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "You'll have to be more specific. Have you ever seen movement, twitching, after full cardiac arrest, hours later?" She stopped chewing. "There are rare cases," she said slowly, setting the sandwich down. "Cadaveric spasms, Lazarus reflexes, neuromuscular discharges. Why?" "No reason," I lied. "Just thought I saw something weird. Figured I'd ask." Her gaze lingered on me longer than I liked. "Mike, you know you can talk to me, right? If you're seeing things." "I'm not," I snapped. "Just a long week." She nodded, but her eyes never left mine. I thanked her and left quickly, heart hammering like a fist against the inside of my ribs. I thought about quitting, about packing up, leaving Weatherford County behind, driving to a beach somewhere, and pretending corpses didn't watch me anymore. But the next morning, when I returned to the morgue to clear my locker, there was a toe tag hanging from it. My name written in bold black ink. Hartley, Michael. Time of death. Pending. I yanked it off and stormed into the security office. Frank, the wiry old guard with one hearing aid and a nicotine patch, looked up in confusion. "Who's been screwing around with the lockers?" I snapped, slamming the tag onto his desk. Frank blinked. "What's that?" "Someone put a toe tag with my name on it." "This some kind of joke?" He picked it up, squinting. Then his face went pale. "Mike, this is from the old batch. Look." He turned the corner of the tag over. "These aren't even in print anymore. They were discontinued 6 years ago. We tossed them." I stared at him. "So where did this one come from?" He didn't answer, just slowly handed it back to me with shaking fingers. That night I dreamed I was in the freezer again. The lights were off, the temperature dropping fast. My breath came out in foggy puffs. I opened drawer after drawer, each one empty, until the last. Inside wasn't case 77, it was me, lying on the steel tray, pale, eyes wide, but not dead. My double stared back at me, mouth slowly forming the words I knew were coming before they arrived. "I see you." I woke up gasping, shirt soaked in sweat. The lights in my apartment were flickering, and from the hallway came the sound of dragging footsteps. The sound was unmistakable, a slow, deliberate dragging, like bare heels scraping against a tiled floor. I sat frozen in bed. The blanket punched at my chest, fists clenched so tight my knuckles ached. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 3:33 a.m. Same time the footage had glitched at the morgue. I strained my ears. The sound wasn't coming from the street or the apartment above. It was inside my apartment. I live alone. The dragging stopped. I waited. Silence, but not peace. There was a tension in the air, like the whole room was holding its breath. The light bulb above my bed flickered. Once, twice, then went dark, leaving only the dim orange glow of the hallway nightlight seeping beneath the door. I reached over to my nightstand drawer and pulled out the flashlight I kept for power outages. It clicked on with a weak sputter, dying batteries, but the narrow beam was enough to illuminate the room. Nothing, no one. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The floorboards were cold against my feet. I took a deep breath and moved toward the door, flashlight trembling in my hand. When I opened it, the hallway was empty, but the toe tag, the one I'd left crumpled on my desk, now hung from the doorknob outside my room. Its string had been retied, perfectly centered, and the name, Hartley Michael, in fresh red ink. Except this time, something was scrawled beneath it in a different handwriting. Jagged, rushed, I never left. I didn't go back to sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with the flashlight propped up in a glass, a kitchen knife in hand. I watched the hallway. I watched the shadows, and I waited. I must have passed out sometime after dawn, because the next thing I remember was waking up to my phone buzzing violently across the table. It was Dr. Mayer. "Mike?" she said. Her voice was tight, rushed. "I need you to come in, now." "What's going on?" "We found something." A pause. "You're not going to like it." When I arrived at the morgue, the air felt wrong. Not just cold, hollow, like the walls themselves were watching. Dr. Mayer stood in the back hallway with Ellis and another tech, Carla. They were pale, unsettled. None of them spoke as I approached. "Where's the body?" I asked, my voice raw from lack of sleep. Mayer didn't answer. Instead, she led us to the furnace room. "Now, here's something you need to understand. We don't use the incinerator. Not anymore. Regulations change. Bodies get transported off-site for cremation. The furnace itself hasn't been operational in over 6 years. But when Meyer opened the heavy steel door, I immediately gagged. The smell was overpowering. Charred flesh, burned hair, something metallic beneath it, like scorched pennies and ash. Inside the furnace, surrounded by chunks of melted fabric and blackened metal, was a partial body. Limbs gone, torso burned beyond recognition. But the head was untouched, preserved, and the face was his. Case 77. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. "That's impossible," I whispered. "That drawer was empty. I saw it with my own eyes." "We know," Mayer said. "There were no logs, no camera footage. The furnace was cold on inspection. It only kicked on early this morning, around 3:35 a.m. The timing wasn't lost on me. I turned to Ellis. "You did your rounds last night. Did you see anything?" He hesitated. "Around 3, I heard something. Thought it was rats in the vents. Then the power dipped." Carla spoke for the first time. "I found this." She held up something small. A key tag, metal, rusted, numbered 77. The original tag from his gurney, but it had a new message etched into the back. "You buried me wrong. We closed the furnace and filed the report as equipment malfunction." None of us believed it. That night I went home and tried something I hadn't done in years. I dug out the old voice recorder I used back when I first started the job. I figured maybe if I spoke out loud, made sense of the events in my own words, I'd find clarity, some kind of logic. But when I hit play to test the batteries, the recorder wasn't already on. It had recordings I didn't make. I pressed play. The first few seconds were static. Then, a voice. Mine. I see you, it whispered. Another voice responded, garbled, wet, inhuman. You will never look away again. I dropped the recorder. That was 4 nights ago. Since then, things have only gotten worse. Every reflective surface in my apartment now warps my image. Not like a funhouse mirror, but like something else is trying to take shape beneath my skin. My eyes look darker in the mirror. My mouth sometimes moves when I'm silent. Once, I watched my reflection blink after I already turned away. And always, that phrase haunts me. You buried me wrong. I started researching burial rites, old ones, ancient ones, cultures that believed improper preparation of the dead could trap souls. Some legends even say the dead will rise, not to hurt the living, but to return what was stolen. But what did we steal? What did I do wrong? This morning, Dr. Mayer called again. Another body, same signs. Unnatural eye movement, pupils intact, skin cold but pliable, muscles stiffening out of sequence. She said she'd never seen anything like it. The tag read, Case 78. I don't know what's happening, but I do know this. Something followed me back from that freezer. Something that was never supposed to be disturbed. It's not just about one corpse anymore. It's about all of them. The whispers are louder now, even during the day. And tonight, before I sat down to write this, I opened my fridge to grab a water bottle. Written in fog on the inside of the fridge door, look behind you. I didn't, not yet. But I think I have to. Story 8. I'm the main course for whatever's gnawing inside the walls. There's a reason people don't stay long in old houses in the woods. It's not just the creaking floors or the way the wind presses against the siding at night, sounding almost like a breath. It's not even the rats, though God knows there were enough of those when I first moved in. No, it's something deeper. An itch behind your eyes. A quiet dread that grows stronger every time you turn a corner and forget if that door was already open. My name is Kevin Maddox. I'm a freelance illustrator, mostly horror book covers and some game concepts when I get lucky. 2 months ago, I signed a lease for a place I found dirt cheap in upstate Pennsylvania. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, and surrounded by nothing but trees and fog. A writer friend of mine said it was exactly the kind of spot where inspiration hits you in the face. I should have listened more carefully when he added, or something else does. The house itself wasn't too bad. A bit run down, sure. Old wallpaper peeling near the baseboards, wood swollen from humidity, and this odd musty smell I couldn't get rid of no matter how many windows I left open. But it had character, and more importantly, it had peace, at least at first. The first morning, I noticed the bite marks. I assumed it was a raccoon. It was on the second floor hallway wall, just above the baseboard, right outside the guest bedroom. 4 or 5 crescent-shaped indentations, not deep, but unmistakably from something with teeth. Maybe a desperate rodent, I thought. So I patched it up with joint compound and paint and forgot about it. But the next morning, they were back, same place, but more of them. This time I ran my fingers over the marks. They were slightly uneven, too jagged for a rodent, I crouched down and noticed something stranger. No scratch marks. Whatever made them didn't claw or gnaw its way to the surface. It just bit purposefully, like it wanted to leave a mark. I laughed nervously to myself and grabbed my phone to take a picture. Something to send to my landlord as a, hey, might be pests, kind of heads up. But right before I snapped the photo, I caught something in the corner of the screen. A shadow behind me, moving. I turned fast. Nothing. Just the guest room door, barely ajar. I've never liked that room. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's got a small window, facing the backwoods, old carpet, and a faded floral border around the ceiling. But the moment you step inside, the air changes. It's like the humidity thickens, like the house exhales. I avoid it when I can. That same night, I laid down in bed with a headache throbbing behind my eyes. I tried to distract myself all day. Work, a podcast, even going out for a walk. But the bite marks stuck with me. Something about how deliberate they were. Almost patterned. Around 2 a.m., I heard chewing. Faint at first, wet smacking noises, like someone sucking on bone. It came from the wall right behind my headboard. I sat up slowly, heart thudding. I waited. The noise stopped, but then it shifted. Lower. It sounded like it was inside the wall, moving down the hallway. I crept out of bed, clutching a flashlight, and opened my bedroom door. The hallway was dark, completely still. But that's when I noticed it. The faintest sound of breathing. Slow, steady, hungry. I aimed the flashlight toward the guest room. The door was wide open now. The next day, I found bite marks on both hallway walls. Longer now. Deeper. Like a dog, or something with a jaw that could unhinge, had been pressing its teeth against the plaster, slowly dragging them down. That night I did something stupid. I stayed up in the hallway, lights off, camera on a tripod, waiting. I told myself it was for proof. If it was some kind of animal, I'd trap it. If it was a prank, God knows how, I hadn't told anyone I'd moved. I'd catch the bastard red-handed. But the truth was, I needed to know. Hours passed. I nodded off once or twice in the chair, jerking awake at the creaks of the house shifting. Around 3:14 a.m., I heard a low skirk like plaster being scraped. I froze. Something moved at the far end of the hall, near the guest room. It was crawling. Slow, deliberate. The air grew cold around me, colder than the outside temperature should have allowed. My breath fogged. My hands went numb. Then I saw it, not clearly, just a glimpse. Something pale, low to the ground, its limbs too long. Head tilted unnaturally, like a child trying to mimic a dog, but getting it all wrong. Its mouth opened wide, so wide the skin cracked and pressed against the wall. I heard the sound again. That chewing. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My camera didn't flash. The battery had died. When I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight filled the hallway. My tripod was knocked over, and the memory card was missing. The bite marks were everywhere now. Up and down the walls, forming crooked trails that twisted in no pattern I could recognize. Some even led to the ceiling. I packed a bag that day. I told myself I'd leave, get a hotel, report the place as unsafe. But then I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject, you've seen it now. Message, don't leave. It gets worse if you leave. No name, no reply option. Just that single sentence. That night, the bite marks appeared on the inside of my bedroom door, and I wasn't asleep when they showed up. I didn't sleep the next night. Not a wink. I sat in the living room with every light on in the house. Lamps, overheads, even the damn microwave light. My back was pressed against the wall opposite the fireplace, blanket around my shoulders, eyes locked on the hallway entrance. It felt like the only way to survive was to see it coming. But nothing came. There was no scratching, no chewing, no pale thing creeping through the dark like a wounded insect. Just the low hum of electricity and the quiet tick-tick-tick of the kitchen clock. I thought about the email again. Don't leave. It gets worse if you leave. Was that a warning or a threat? By sunrise, I was shivering, part exhaustion, part dread. I stood up, joints stiff, head pounding like I'd been drugged. I hadn't eaten since the morning before, and my throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming in my sleep. I couldn't remember if I had. When I walked past the hallway, I saw something new. The bite marks had spread. Not just more of them, but higher up. Some reached nearly shoulder height now. And some were smaller, like from a different mouth, a smaller jaw. I turned and stared at the guest room door. Still closed, but the floor beneath it was darker than usual. Damp. I stepped closer. That's when I noticed it. Teeth, tiny, white baby teeth, lined up just under the baseboard. Dozens of them, pushed into the wall, like someone had carefully pressed each one in with a thumb. Some were broken. Some had hair stuck to them. My stomach lurched. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. That afternoon, I tried calling the landlord. No answer. I left a voicemail explaining the damage, though I didn't mention the teeth. Just said it looked like animal activity, and I needed someone to come out and inspect. Then I called my sister Claire. She picked up on the second ring. Kevin, what's wrong with your voice? You sound like you've been crying. I didn't even realize I had. We talked for 20 minutes. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't, but I gave her enough. The bite marks, the sounds, the unease. Claire offered to drive up from Harrisburg and stay the night. Said she'd bring her dog, Willow, for company. I hesitated. Something in me wanted her here, just to prove I wasn't losing it. But a deeper instinct, something animal, screamed no. Whatever was in this house, it wanted more people. Still, I agreed. Told her to bring flashlights and a camera. She arrived just after 8 p.m. Claire was always the brave one between us. Blunt, skeptical, never scared of anything. She came through the door with Willow trotting beside her, tail wagging like it was any other visit. The moment they crossed the threshold, Willow froze. She stopped dead at the doorway, hackles raised, eyes locked on the hallway. Then she let out a low, guttural growl I'd never heard from her before. Claire tried coaxing her forward, but the dog whimpered, turned, and ran back to the car. Refused to come inside. Okay, that's not normal, Claire muttered, lips tightening. She stepped inside anyway. I shut the door behind her. We set up in the living room again. I made us tea and tried to explain more while Claire examined the bite marks with a flashlight and quiet disbelief. "You're not faking this," she whispered. "Jesus, Kevin. Something bit your walls. These aren't from rats." She pulled out her phone and took a few pictures, zooming in on the shapes. "Look, they're all angled upward. Whatever did this had to be crouching low, like it was trying to emerge from the floor." That word stuck with me. Emerge. Around 1 a.m., the power cut out. No warning, no flicker. Just gone. The sudden darkness was suffocating. Claire and I grabbed flashlights, standing back to back like kids in a haunted maze. Even then, the light barely seemed to push back the dark. That's when the smell started. Rotten meat, mold, and something else, something sweet, like old candy left out in the sun. Claire gagged and covered her nose. We heard the first bite at 1:17 a.m. crunch. It came from the ceiling this time. We both looked up and saw it. Not a full shape, just movement. A disturbance in the texture, like something just beneath the drywall was shifting, pressing outward. Crunch. Again, closer. A long crack split the plaster above the hallway, and something black leaked out, thick and slow, like oil. It hit the floor with a wet plop. Claire grabbed my arm. We need to leave now. But then came the sound. A voice, a child's voice, just above a whisper. You're already inside me. We ran, bolted for the front door, but when we reached it, something was wrong. The handle was ice cold, and no matter how hard I twisted, it wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside. Claire slammed her shoulder into the frame. Who the hell locks a house from the outside? She screamed. The hallway behind us groaned. We turned. A shape was crawling out of the guest room. Slowly, not rushing, not hiding, just dragging itself forward. I could see the joints bending the wrong way, could hear the wet slap of its palms against the wood. Claire grabbed her flashlight and shone it directly at the thing. That was the last mistake. It screamed, not like a person, not like an animal. It was a sound so sharp and high-pitched, I felt it rattle in my teeth. My vision blurred. Claire dropped the flashlight and fell to her knees, clutching her ears. The creature moved fast. Too fast. It was on her in seconds, but it didn't touch her. It just leaned close, jaw open wide. And I swear to God it bit the air, like it was tasting her fear. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished, crawled back into the shadows, into the guest room, and shut the door behind it. Just like that. The power came back, the front door unlocked, and the bite marks on the wall. They had grown again, sprawling now into the living room, forming a shape, a mouth. Claire didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. We sat in the car outside until sunrise. Willow curled in the back seat, whining low and constant. She left at dawn. I told her not to come back. But the worst part, when I walked back into the house, the bite marks had started forming on my bedroom ceiling. And when I lay down, I could hear it breathing above me. It's not chewing the walls anymore. Now it's waiting. For me, I haven't left the house in 4 days. I tell myself it's because I'm waiting on answers. That if I leave, I'll lose control of whatever this is. But the truth is, I think I'm afraid that if I do leave, something will follow me. Or worse, stay behind, waiting for me to come back. Since Claire's visit, the house has changed. Not just the bite marks, though those are everywhere now. On the ceilings, door frames, even inside the goddamn fridge. No, it's the feeling that's changed. The house has gone still, watching, and at night, I swear the walls breathe. The third night after Claire left, I tried burning sage. Not because I believed it would work, but because I was desperate. I waved it through every room, every hallway, muttering whatever I could remember from a paranormal podcast I half listened to months ago. Cleanse this space. Banish whatever spirit. Go in peace. The smoke was thick and bitter, burning my throat. For a moment, I thought I felt something shift. The temperature in the hallway dropped instantly, like the whole house inhaled. Then the lights went out again. This time, I didn't panic. I stood still, listening. That's when I heard the voice. Not whispering, not growling, just speaking clearly and coldly from inside the guest room. It's not the house. I dropped the sage. That sentence looped in my mind all night. It's not the house. What does that mean? If it's not the house, is it me? I thought about every odd thing in my life lately, before I even moved here. The recurring dream of the hallway with no end. The sensation of being watched at my old apartment, even when I lived 10 floors up with no facing windows. Was it following me this whole time? I spent the next morning researching sleep paralysis, mold hallucinations, black fungus exposure, anything I could cling to. But nothing explained the bite marks. Nothing explained how they moved. Or the teeth. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I walked into the guest room. There's a point where fear becomes numbness. When you've been steeped in dread so long it starts to taste like routine. That's what I felt when I opened the door. Not bravery, just burnout. The room was darker than it should have been, like the window had stopped letting in light. The wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips now, exposing rotted wood beneath. And the smell, God, the smell, sour, metallic, like old pennies and spoiled milk. The bite marks here were different, deeper, wider, and they moved in spirals, not random like the others. These marks had direction. At the center of the far wall was something new. A small square, about 2 feet wide, carved crudely into the plaster. A crawl space. I didn't remember seeing that before, but there it was, slightly ajar. I stood staring at it for at least 10 minutes before I knelt down. I could hear something behind it. Not breathing this time, whispering, but not in English, or anything I could recognize. It was fast, rhythmic, like a chant, but too broken to understand. I reached for the handle. The metal was warm, not just body temperature warm, alive warm, pulsing. I jerked my hand back, and then the whispering stopped. I closed the door slowly, backed out of the room, and locked it. That night I dreamt I was inside the crawl space, crawling endlessly in the dark, and something was crawling just behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat of its breath, but not close enough to see. It whispered in that same broken tongue over and over. When I woke up, my hands were covered in dirt. 2 days ago, I heard footsteps in the attic. Not mice, not squirrels. Heavy, slow. I grabbed a hammer and climbed the narrow pull-down ladder, half expecting to be dragged into the dark. The air up there was stifling, thick with dust and something else. Something damp and living. The attic was empty, save for one thing. A mirror. Old, cracked, ornate frame that didn't match anything else in the house. I walked toward it, compelled by something I couldn't explain. The reflection showed the room exactly as it was, but without me in it. Then slowly, something stepped into the frame from behind, pale, crawling, long fingers dragging along the floor. I turned around. Nothing. When I looked back, it was smiling at me in the mirror. Rows of teeth, too small for a human mouth. And they were moving, shifting and biting even while it grinned. I knocked the mirror over and ran. It didn't break. I haven't been upstairs since then. I've moved my mattress into the living room, closed all the doors, covered the windows, but the bite marks keep showing up. On the floorboards now, beneath where I sleep. I feel them in my dreams, Those jaws closing in around me. Not biting flesh, but something deeper. Like it's chewing through my sanity, one piece at a time. Last night, I heard my own voice in the hallway, calling me, begging me to come. Kevin, it's okay now, but we're part of it. I never said those words, but it sounded like me. I think it's learning, adapting. It wants to be someone. Tonight, I finally got a call back from my landlord. I almost cried when I saw the number, but it wasn't what I expected. Mr. Maddox? The voice said. Older, gruff. You say you're living in the red farmhouse off Briar Hollow Road? Yeah, I said, heart pounding. A long pause. That property has been uninhabited for years. We tore down the guest house after the incident in '91. You must be mistaken. I laughed. A dry, cracked thing. No, I've been living here. I have the lease. We never signed any lease, he said. That place should be a foundation and a shell. If you're inside something, you shouldn't be. You need to get out. Then he hung up. I tried calling back. No answer. I checked the county records online. He was right. The house burned down in 1991. There's no structure listed on this land, no permits, no address. But I'm still inside it. And the bite marks are on the inside of my skin now. They itch. They twitch when I sleep. Something's growing in me. Something hungry.